Christine was left without parents since childhood. Her life was calm, until one day, a mysterious fluffy puppy named Mani appeared, changing the whole world and even the name of the main character. Catherine was only 5 years old when she and her mother were thrown out of the Duke's estate, despite the fact that she was his illegitimate daughter. The servant tried to help the baby somehow. He said that the lady was expecting a child, so while the owner was away, she kicked them out of the mansion. The young man was ready to deliver the woman and the girl to any part of the small town. Kat calmed her mother down as best she could. They couldn't stay near the gate any longer. They had to find a new place to live. The little beauty herself didn't know what to do, but seeing Haley's tear-stained face, she tried not to cry. Finally, the young woman decided where she could stay for the near future. The carriage brought the mother and daughter to a beautiful, tall building. The opera house was where young Haley worked as an actress for several years. The girl's mother died that same year, after the child mysteriously disappeared, and little Kat lived and worked in the costume shop for the next few years. Now she had a place to stay and food. The tailors taught the little girl to sew and take care of things. There were a lot of outfits, and each actor in the theater had to prepare their own for the performance. Catherine helped the workers and carried clothes to the dressing rooms. The women were upset for the girl who was growing up all alone. Having gone to try on another outfit, the main character thought, the old actor began to treat her differently than in childhood. She did not like his words and languid look. The girl called the theater assistant and asked him to give the costume to the actor in exchange for cookies. Time passed quickly. Catherine turned 17. She grew up a slender beauty with huge green eyes. The main character learned that the theater owner Emma promised to give the girl to a rich, noble count. The owner had signed a contract long ago and was waiting for her worker to turn 18. Catherine was outraged by Emma's decision to sell her and demanded to know the price. The lady was a little taken aback by the girl's pressure, but named a figure twice as large as what the nobleman had promised her. The main character promised to collect money to become free. The theater owner was upset, but agreed to the deal. Only after closing the door behind her was Kat able to relax. Tears flowed from the poor man's eyes. The sum was fabulous. In the evening, there was a premiere on the theater stage, and noble persons were supposed to arrive. Catherine learned that her father was to attend the performance. The girl plucked up the courage to ask her only parent for money. Duke Jones looked virtually unchanged and very young. Coming closer, Catherine saw that her father's own daughter was standing with him, and they were talking animatedly about something. The main character rushed away. She realized that if no one had ever taken an interest in her for so many years, then there was no help to be expected from anywhere. Kat came to the theater owner again to ask her to pay the required amount in installments over several years. The girl calculated that it would take her at least 6 years to fully pay off Emma. The lady was ready to allow an installment plan with interest, but she heard a categorical no. All these years, the girl had worked for free, so she was not going to pay the additional amount. The theater owner signed a contract with Catherine, and now the girl could leave the building to look for work. The tailors were upset by the young assistant's decision to leave them. The main character said that she would look for a position as a maid for a wealthy nobleman. The women vied with each other to tell the girl about the various difficulties that a beauty might encounter. Catherine had already thought everything through. It was no wonder she had spent so many years in the theater. Christine was upset. The TV remote was broken again. I needed to call the repair service. Suddenly, a small, fluffy puppy appeared on the screen. The girl realized that she had been very tired at work in recent days, but the animal began to talk to her, which frightened the main character even more. Christine didn't understand what was happening, assuming it was a dream. A cute dog named Mani told the girl that she had won a prize and offered to change her life. There were several pictures from different eras and events on the monitor. The main character had to choose the scene that she liked the most. The girl thought about it. She had no intention of changing anything. One of the episodes attracted the most attention. A happy girl was playing with a doll in some beautiful room on the bed. The painting exuded warmth and comfort. The fluffy baby announced that he had made a choice, and nothing could be changed. Manny happily clicked the keyboard, confirming the result. Christine tried to change the situation, but the dog could do nothing. In the frame that the girl liked, it was impossible to add a new character, so she was given a body replacement, which frightened the main character even more. As a prize, the puppy promised to add one option, which could only be found out later. Christine decided that after overwork, hallucinations and strange dreams are possible, it's time to wake up. Opening her eyes, the main character saw small hands. A little girl with big green eyes sat on a bed in a huge, beautiful room in front of a monitor. A bonus appeared on the screen. It was unearthly beauty, Everyone who could be nearby and were better had to disappear. The reborn Christine screamed in horror and waved her arms, hoping to wake up. This is how the updated 5-year-old Catherine, or Cat for short, was born. The theater's costume department was constantly in full swing. The main character told her older friends that, according to rumors, a position for a servant was about to become available in Prince Edward's estate. The tailors tried to dissuade the girl. It was known that the young man was known as a great ladies' man and constantly changed his chosen ones. One of the young actresses, Diana, was currently one of them. Kat listened to the advice. She really wanted to leave the theater to pay off its owner faster. The girl came up with a way to hide her beauty and get rid of the annoying advances of suitors. The main character prepared for herself a costume of a fat, clumsy maid. During the conversation, Emma's commanding voice called Catherine to her side. The hostess ordered the girl to serve a separate room, where especially distinguished guests were watching the premiere, while their servant left on the master's orders. The main character could not refuse the owner. She spent so many years in the theater. The only problem was the lack of an outfit. Kat had only one dress, which had once been given to her by her mother's cousin, the actress Taylor. The premiere of a famous opera was taking place on stage. Edward was bored. The young actress did not impress him at all. A crowd of female fans peered through the door, distracting attention from the performance. The prince and his cousin Duke Austin tried to understand the meaning of the opera, while the servant drove away curious girls. The main character entered the box with a tray on which stood wine and glasses. The door was slightly open. The assistant went to carry out the orders of his masters. Edward expressed dissatisfaction with the girl's delay. Kat tried to open the bottle herself. Unfortunately, the cork just didn't want to come out of the narrow neck. As a result, the glass bottle easily slipped out of the hands of the inept assistant, straight onto the floor. A second later, the prince's entire suit was soaked in red wine. The main character was confused. She didn't know what to do, how to wipe off the numerous stains. The girl tore off a homemade piece of fabric that had been hastily sewn onto her open, elegant dress. There was complete silence in the loggia. Edward was looking at the clumsy stranger with fascination. Catherine couldn't understand why she wasn't being scolded until she saw where the guest was looking. The girl covered her exposed chest with wide sleeves. The prince promised to leave the main character alive and ordered her to quickly leave the room. Catherine knew all the corridors in the theater, so she was not afraid of being seen by anyone in such an outfit. Trembling with fear, the girl ran to the dressing room to change her clothes quickly. Late that evening in his bedroom, Edward remembered the funny episode with the stranger. The prince invited his latest chosen one, a theater actress, to his place. It was time for the maid to send her home. The maid did not respond to her master's instructions, captivated by his stately, naked body. Edward had to call in his old assistant Henry to once again look for a replacement for yet another worker who had failed to cope with her duties. Thus, a new servant appeared in the country residence of the second contender for the throne. The palace impressed Catherine with its beauty and size. The main character, dressed as a fat, ugly worker, stood at the main entrance with a letter of recommendation from one of her great-aunt's rich suitors. Every girl dreams of finding her prince and marrying him. Edward had another chosen one who imagined herself to be his only beloved. The owner of the palace left the bedroom and headed to the bathroom. The maid had to send the girl home immediately in his absence. The beauty desperately resisted, not wanting to leave the bed. The maid brought clothes and clean bed linen. Another mistress threatened to fire the employee, but Kat had already begun to get used to her duties. The maid calmly changed the clean bed, paying no attention to the shouts and threats. The prince, as always, appeared unexpectedly. There were no more tasks for this evening. It was time to go to rest. The main character had her own room where she could calmly change clothes and take off her disguise. The wig and cotton clothes prevented the body from breathing. Tired, Kat happily fell onto the small bed. It was possible to take a little rest from the heavy burden. Before leaving the theater, prima donna Taylor said goodbye to her niece, giving her the glasses she had ordered for the upcoming masquerade. The mother's sister was the girl's only relative. The actress wished the girl good luck and promised to help if necessary. But before she could get into the prince's bedroom as a maid, Catherine had to meet the senior housekeeper, who opened the door and saw an awkward, fat girl with ugly glasses and dark skin who had arrived to serve as a maid. The appearance of the new maid shocked everyone. The huge glasses and disproportionate body disfigured the girl. This is how the main character got her own small, bright room for the first time. Kat tried to make her life more comfortable. The girl hung up drawings of clothing models that she had designed herself. There were many maids. Each had her own workstation. The senior housekeeper was always dissatisfied, finding fault with every little thing. The main character was forbidden to be seen by the guests. Catherine was given the task and set out to clean numerous rooms. In the library, the girl met her colleague Meg. For several days, the main character cleaned and washed the kitchen, dining room, and workrooms. The second maid commanded the new worker and constantly complained that she used to be a servant in the prince's bedroom, and as punishment, she was demoted and transferred to another place. Kat couldn't stand it and refused to follow her lazy friend's instructions. Throwing down the broom, rag, and bucket, the girl went in search of her boss. Meg had to continue cleaning herself. The maid complained to her friend that the new maid was not doing anything. The colleagues conferred and came up with a plan to take revenge on the ugly employee. The actress Diana was supposed to come to see the prince in the evening. Meg sent plump Kat with the kettle in her place. The main character remembered the senior manager's order not to appear in front of the guests and was surprised. The maid told the new girl that the mug contained a contraceptive that the owner's chosen one had to drink completely. Catherine had no choice but to head to the bedroom with the tray, glad that there would be one less illegitimate child. Diana was unhappy with the appearance of an unfamiliar servant. The girl offered the guest a drink. The actress suspected that the teapot contained a herb that affected her condition, so she was always reluctant to drink the decoction, which is why the maid sent a competitor who would fail the task and would be punished. Kat remembered one of the performances in which Diana took part and praised the beauty. In fact, the older friends in the costume department spoke very unflatteringly about the abilities of the young artist. The chosen one offered the maid a cup of tea. The main character happily agreed, citing the fact that these are very expensive herbs that affect the beauty and health of women, but asked to explain everything to her terrible boss so that she would not be scolded. Diana changed her mind and happily drank the entire drink, asking Kat to serve her on a regular basis in the future. At this time, Meg complained to the senior housekeeper about the high-handedness of the new girl, who went into the guest room without permission. Catherine left the bedroom and was heading to the dining room when a barrage of accusations rained down on her. The maid didn't lose her composure and said that it was Meg who sent her there, reporting all the details of the conversation, which she couldn't know since she had started work a couple of days ago, and besides, the empty cup confirmed the completion of the task. The girl spoke confidently, which proved her innocence. The envious maid's plans collapsed. The new girl was not only not punished, but now she was assigned to serve the actress. Catherine felt uncomfortable in the mansion. All the workers turned away from the ugly girl. Meg had long wanted to return to the prince's bedroom, from where she had been expelled for her inappropriate behavior several months ago. So she began to work on the maid from Edward's bedchamber, convincing her that the master was secretly in love with her. In addition, the evil maid was constantly watching the new girl, trying to do mischief. After another scandal with a worker who undressed in front of the prince at the behest of the insidious Meg, an angry Edward sent his senior assistant to find a replacement. Henry came to the manager of the maids for advice. The will of fate has sent the main character to the office of the senior housekeeper at this moment. Those present looked thoughtfully at the girl who entered. The owner didn't care at all about the maid's appearance. He needed a responsible and adequate worker. The decision was made, and Catherine was taken as the new servant in the prince's bedroom. The main character was not ready for such a turn of events. She was not interested in Edward. The main task was to pay off the owner of the theater. Having learned that her salary would double, which meant that she would give the entire amount to Emma faster, the girl became thoughtful. Kat was even happy with the offer and inquired about her new duties. So unexpectedly, despite her ugly appearance, to spite the cruel Meg, she ended up in the prince's bedroom himself. However, on the first day, the main character, seeing the handsome man's naked body, deeply regretted what had happened. The girl bowed low and spoke with her head down. Old Henry said in preliminary training that the master does not like it when people look him in the eye. Edward was surprised and allowed him to straighten up. He wanted to see his interlocutor's gaze. The prince retired to the bathroom, ordering that his next mistress be woken up and brought out. Showing the girl the door was the second problem in the maid's job. The servant did not wait and entered the bedroom to take the guest away. Finally, the actress woke up and got dressed. The butler scolded Kat for being slow. Everything had to be done very quickly before the owner returned from bathing. When everyone had left, Meg decided to remember the past and quietly crept into the prince's apartments. The main character heard footsteps and turned on the light. Catherine drove away the uninvited guest, warning that she would tell everyone about her actions. Meg was very angry and decided to take revenge on her ugly competitor. The next day, the maid met Diana, who had arrived early for a date with her lover. The envious maid said that she would serve the beauty herself today, since everyone else was busy. As if by accident, the cunning worker let it slip that the prince was going to leave the actress. Diana was shocked, thinking that Edward had shared some information with his maid. The girl continued to come up with bad words that she allegedly heard from Kat addressed to the young lady. The actress was upset and was going to sort things out with the fat worker. The prince was traveling to his residence, which was intended for receiving his chosen ones. Edward was thoughtful. He asked his assistants what they would do if his previous tea had gotten cold. Old Henry was surprised by the question. He, of course, said that they would serve a new portion. The gentleman remembered the previous evening and the 3 untouched cups of tea on the serving table in his bedroom. The prince was very surprised by the new maid's offer. The fat woman was upset about the spoiled tea leaves and agreed to prepare the drink only on demand so as not to waste supplies. Edward liked the courage and determination of the girl, who was not afraid to propose. Kat was sitting in the guest room, waiting for her host to arrive, when she heard quiet footsteps. The main character looked back and was surprised to see that the actress had arrived before the appointed time. Diana slapped the maid with all her might. Catherine did not understand the reason and asked to explain why she was punished. The maid did not feel any guilt at all. Meg stood behind the door, gleefully eavesdropping on what was going on. The prince and his assistants appeared in time. He saw what happened. The mistress accused the maid of gossiping behind her back. Diana was very upset. She did not believe that she would soon part with Edward. The main character rightly rejected all the words. She could not read the prince's thoughts and could not know his plan. Meg brazenly entered the hall and confirmed the actress's words, speaking about Kat's foul language towards the mistress. The owner of the palace listened attentively to all the girls. The new maid was outraged by her colleague's treacherous behavior. Catherine accused Meg of lying in order to get rid of her rival and returned to work in the prince's bedroom. The maid was the only one interested in gossip and the dismissal of the ugly competitor. Edward didn't even have to give the order. Henry himself suggested that Diana leave the residence. Meg was punished and was never allowed to be seen by the prince again. It was time for the second heir to the throne to return to his main palace. The master's personal servant suddenly fell ill, and Catherine, by his order, had to go with him to a new place. The girl was riding in a carriage to another city for the first time. The main character admired the beautiful landscapes. The coat of arms on the gate alerted the maid. There was the same one on her father's estate. Catherine tried to calm down, but thoughts about the past did not leave her. The huge palace was simply magnificent. Before the trip, Henry told the maid about her main duties. The girl's main task was to prepare tea in a magic vessel in a timely manner. It was enough to pour cold water into a glass bottle, and it would immediately boil. It was the first time Catherine had encountered such an object. Previously, she had only heard about some magical things. The palace had a portal to the neighboring duchy. Finding herself in another world, the main character felt dizzy and her ears were blocked, as if she had flown 1,000 floors in a high-speed elevator. The prince's young butler, Smith, was already waiting for his assistant. It was time to get back into the carriage. There was still a long distance to travel to the main residence. The servant asked the maid sitting next to the coachman to prepare a drink. The main character quickly coped with the task. In addition to the magic bottle, she had a whole suitcase for the tea ceremony. The wooden wheel of the carriage unexpectedly hit a large stone. The cart jumped, and Kat couldn't hold the full cup of aromatic liquid. The hot tea hit Smith right in the face. The maid was very upset and worried about the young man. The prince was unperturbed and did not scold the maid. Edward ordered Kate to get into the carriage. The girl again took out the magic bottle, which she hid in her many clothes, afraid of breaking the valuable thing. The gentleman took the cup of tea in his hands with pleasure. The prince's legs were numb from the long journey, and he placed them on the seat next to the maid. Catherine was ordered to do massage, something she had never done before. The main character tried to remember the technology she once saw on TV. Edward was dozing. The road was very long. The next portal was under repair again. It was late evening, and time to stop for the night at the nearest inn. The prince ordered that no one should be allowed into his room. The main character was ordered to prepare a bath. Edward reprimanded the maid for waiting too long. He was tired and wanted to take a bath. Kat promised to definitely improve next time. The smell from the detergents was terrible, so the master ordered the bathtub to be moved to the living room. The main character turned to the knight guarding the entrance for help. A few minutes later, the contented prince sat in the warm water. The girl was shocked that her duties included washing the master. A completely naked Edward was relaxing in the bath and giving instructions to an embarrassed maid. Catherine held the washcloth and didn't know how to touch his main male organ. The maid was very happy when the prince kindly agreed to wash himself, sending her to prepare food. The prince thought about it. For some reason, he really wanted the modest girl to stay. After dinner, Henry informed the gentleman that the count and his daughters were insistently asking to be received, without intending to leave. This situation arose constantly when the prince stopped at this place. A nobleman tried to enlist the support of an influential person and wanted to marry off one of his girls. The head butler could not cope with the guest's persistent demands. The main character advised the owner to act decisively. The prince went to bed, taking his maid with him into the room and ordering the knight to guard the entrance. Edward couldn't sleep. He wanted to talk to the girl. Kat was lying next to him on the floor on a mattress. She turned away and pretended to snore. After a while, everyone fell asleep. Suddenly, quiet steps woke up the prince. The main character was tired of her adventures and slept soundly, not responding to the master's call. Edward tried in vain to wake the maid. One of the count's daughters climbed into the bed of the heir to the throne. The girl didn't have time to say anything before she received a punch to the head from the awakened maid. The young lady lay unconscious on the floor, and the maid tried to bring her to her senses. Suddenly, the stranger jumped up and threw herself into the prince's arms. Edward ordered the stranger to be taken out the door. Catherine asked the noblewoman to leave the room. The indignant girl wanted to hit the maid. The main character deftly dodged the slap. The prince stopped the young countess from trying again. The old butler hurried towards his master's voice. The girl was declared a spy, who decided to attack a high-ranking official. Henry was surprised by the owner's word. Edward ordered the arrest of the nobleman and his daughter, accusing them of treason. The count was shocked by the prince's decision and tried to justify himself by citing the girl's feelings of love. The young lady confirmed her father's words with fear. The pretender to the throne was angered by the attitude of the nobility towards servants, who could be beaten with impunity. The maid stood modestly at the entrance and watched the scene unfold. The count did not understand why the prince was angry because of the maid. Henry suggested leaving the analysis until the morning and going to bed. There was still another day of travel ahead. Edward instructed the aristocrats to apologize to the maid. Catherine was perplexed. She didn't want to be protected at all. The prince did not like at all the arrogance of the nobles, who let their hands fall and humiliate the dignity of ordinary people. The count and his daughter were forced to carry out their master's order and apologize to the maid. The main character was surprised by Edward's attitude towards her problems. It was late at night, and no one noticed the carriage standing near the inn. The noble stranger sitting inside had been watching the girl from afar for several days. Morning came. It was time to hit the road again. The sleepless night took its toll, and the main character fell asleep. The prince wanted tea and tried to get the magic bottle hidden in the maid's magnificent clothes. Kat instantly woke up, thinking that her master was planning to undress her. The girl was ready to resist. Edward had to calm her down. Finally, the carriage entered the courtyard, and the main character had to take the suitcases to the palace. A knight he knew kindly agreed to help the girl. He had heard about the master's attitude towards her. The young man decided that he could easily seduce the ugly simpleton in order to win the favor of the owner. The prince waited impatiently for Kat to bring the things. Henry fulfilled his request and brought a nightgown for the maid. Edward decided to go down personally to look for the maid. The owner's attention was drawn to the scene of the maid's conversation with the handsome guard. The gentleman scolded the girl for waiting too long. The knight was ordered to do his duties and not flirt with the servants. Otherwise, he would be sent into exile for his misdeed the previous night, when he allowed uninvited guests into the inn. While the prince was drinking tea, the main character looked at the gift, wondering how she would wear her camouflage outfit. She had never had any sleeping clothes before. Having received permission to try on the clothes, Kat retired to the next room. The girl was upset. She was already very hot in the large amount of cotton wool. The sight of the disguised servant shocked the prince. The nightgown was enormous in size, completely hiding the maid's figure. Edward noticed that Catherine's belly had become even bigger. The main character explained that during the day, she is forced to wear a corset to hide her curvaceous figure. The prince wanted to replace the thick glasses, behind which the girl's eyes were completely invisible. But remembering her suitors, he abandoned this idea. A visit to a jewelry store was planned for the next day. Kat went with the owner. Edward was thoughtful. He did not understand why the jewelry was not in demand among buyers. Despite the lack of a market, the prince still wanted to start selling expensive jewelry. The main character suggested having a cup of tea to distract the gentleman from his sad thoughts. The prince agreed, waiting for the girl to prepare the drink. The wheel hit a hole. The carriage jerked sharply and tilted. The magic bottle flew out of Kat's hands. Stuck in a rut, the wooden rim broke and the cart fell on its side. The maid flew from her seat straight at Edward. The gentleman managed to grab the girl tightly. Something cracked under his hand. The prince was upset to realize that the maid had deceived him. The main character was scared and denied that she was anyone's spy. Edward doubted the authenticity of the thick frame. The servants tried to repair the carriage as quickly as possible. The pretender to the throne looked closely at the maid. The girl tried to justify herself, but the prince could not believe her words. Catherine was afraid that she would be fired or killed. Edward sat down on the seat and asked the maid about his competitors. The main character confessed that she made an ugly outfit to get a job as a maid in order to avoid harassment from noble persons. The girl said that she had been an orphan since the age of 5 and lived and worked in the costume department of the opera house, helping the tailors. The prince listened attentively to the poor servant's story. After some thought, Edward allowed Kat to leave the masquerade to prying eyes. The owner suggested that the girl take off extra clothing at night so that her body could rest. The repairs were completed, and the convoy was ready to move on. Due to a breakdown, the companions had to stop for the night at the prince's childhood friend, Duke Dennis. Henry prepared a bedroom for his master, knowing that his master would be irritated by the delay on the road. To the assistant's surprise, Edward did not scold anyone. A tired maid brought in a suitcase with tea accessories. Looking at the maid, the prince smiled mysteriously. The old servant could not understand why the mood of his always serious master had changed. It was very late. The bedroom was ready. Edward changed his clothes and got ready for bed. The sight of the maid in a huge pink robe made the prince laugh. Henry knocked on the door to tell him some important news. The maid was ready to open the door, but the master got ahead of her. The owner warned the girl that no one should see her in her night clothes. The prince opened the door slightly and warned that he would come out soon. The owner of the estate, despite the late hour, returned home from his trip to greet his old friend and share the latest news. Duke Dennis and his father were longtime assistants and allies of Edward. The prince was distracted from his conversation when he saw Henry trying to enter the bedroom. The gentleman detained the assistant, fearing that Catherine had not had time to change her clothes. The door opened, and the sleepy face of a plump maid appeared from behind it. The girl apologized for accidentally falling asleep, despite the fact that the owner was awake. Edward sighed in relief when he saw the familiar appearance of the maid. Henry could not understand why the master did not allow him to enter the bedroom and was very surprised. Even Dennis suspected that feelings might have developed between his friend and his ugly maid. The main news that the old friend reported was the arrival at the palace of Duke Jones with his daughter. The nobleman was engaged in the jewelry business. He owned a production facility for processing and stores selling precious stones. His underage daughter dreamed of marriage and had long been in love with Edward. More than 6 months ago, the prince recklessly invited noble persons to visit him. Dennis was unaware of the duke's true motives for his arrival, although he could assume that he was seeking political support and could be a good ally for the second claimant to the throne. Citing fatigue, Edward went to the bedroom, leaving his astonished friend alone in his own living room. In the morning, the carriage set off for the city jewelry store. The main character was going to take a seat next to the coachman, leaving her tea suitcase inside. The prince ordered that the maid be nearby. Dennis insisted that the maid sit with him. On the way, Edward's friend asked Kat for a drink, and she handed him a bottle of spring water. The maid categorically refused to give the noble gentleman her master's cup. The prince himself did not pay attention to the squabble that broke out in the carriage. The pretender to the throne always took tea accessories with him on his numerous trips. Additionally, there was always a reserve of clean water in barrels and bottles in the neighboring carts. Edward was very provident, so his convoy was usually quite large. Dennis calmed down. The friends were about to take part in a major royal hunt. The event for especially noble persons was usually held no more than once a year. This year, the prince's rival, Duke William, promised to be present at the shooting range. Edward was upset by this news. He was not ready for close communication with his rival. A childhood friend has confirmed the participation of the first contender for the throne in the hunt. The letter Dennis had received the day before contained various social gossip. The main character listened to the news, remembering TV series. One of the events was the news about an actress who had found herself a new chosen one and was pregnant. The prince could not remember who it was about. Catherine reminded the owner of Diana, with whom he had parted so quickly about 2 months ago. The young gentleman was thoughtful, absent-mindedly looking at the landscapes flashing past the window. Dennis couldn't believe his eyes. He didn't recognize his childhood friend. The prince's whole appearance indicated that he was in love. Finally, the carriage entered the city and stopped on the main street. The companions entered a huge house with a large hall inside. Edward and Dennis sat down on the comfortable, soft sofas. The master ordered the maid to stay nearby. Kat couldn't figure out where the store they were going to visit was. Finally, the owner of the establishment brought a large, beautiful box. The main character saw similar ones in the theater, but there were usually inexpensive decorations for the artist's performances. Catherine loved to match her outfits to the color of her suit. The prince asked the maid to come closer. There were brightly colored stones in the wooden box. The maid saw such beauty for the first time. Edward asked the assistant to give some feminine advice. The main character looked around carefully. Kat suggested changing the environment first. The friends listened to the ordinary maid with surprise. The prince could not understand why the precious stones could not be sold. Dennis tried to persuade Edward not to go into the jewelry business. The maid continued to reason. She did not understand why beauty needed to be hidden. The young men were interested in the girl's words. The prince asked to share what could be changed in the store to increase sales. Kat remembered the glass display cases with lots of decorations that caught the eye. The maid said that despite the large expenses on equipment and advertising, everything would pay off in the near future. The shop windows should be of interest to customers, so there should be a lot of them. The store must have specially trained employees. Shopping should be a pleasure. And that is exactly what Christine dreamed of when she wanted to open her own clothing store in the distant future. The prince looked at the girl's inspired gaze as she enthusiastically talked about the new type of store. The captivated Catherine simply glowed with happiness. In the evening, the friends were again left alone in the living room. Dennis did not approve of his friend's choice and his attitude towards the ugly maid. A longtime assistant advised changing the maid to avoid gossip from others. Edward reassured his friend that he was not in love with the girl, but categorically refused to change her. Then the conversation turned to political topics. The prince needed allies, and Duke Jones and his daughter could go over to Edward's side. A sunny morning arrived. The main royal palace was welcoming guests. The carriage of the heir to the throne drove up to the main entrance. His close friend, the handsome Marquis Harris, was already waiting for him. The young man took great care of his appearance and was a favorite with girls. The nobleman was attracted by the appearance of the maid, who got out of the carriage after the prince. The marquis greeted the plump stranger, who immediately began to bow. The young nobles were glad to meet. They had been together since childhood and always supported each other. The maid stood alone to the side, listening to the joyful cries of the master and his assistants. Edward asked Henry to take care of the girl, give her a room and feed her. Harris was especially glad to meet him. His friend had been traveling around the cities for several months and often spent time at his estate. Kat tried to restrain herself with all her might. She needed this job, so she was ready to endure bitter words and mocking looks from those around her. Having settled into the small room, the maid went in search of the kitchen. The dining room was empty, but on the way back, the main character was called out by a stern lady surrounded by a group of maids. The workers whispered among themselves in surprise, seeing the stranger's ugly figure and thick glasses, through which her eyes were completely invisible. Catherine flinched at the loud voice of the senior servant of Baroness Lauren's palace. The girl bowed affably and introduced herself. The noblewoman was surprised by the strange appearance of the prince's servant. The main character reported that her boss was not interested in the worker's appearance. The indignant baroness went to look for Edward to propose a replacement. She had long wanted to remove old Henry. This was a reason to accuse him of insufficient competence in choosing personnel. The maids followed their formidable boss. Lauren had long planned to make her nephew Smith her senior assistant. The senior servants found friends in the small hall. The prince informed the baroness that he was satisfied with the work and appearance of his maid, and therefore did not intend to look for a replacement for her. Dennis explained what happened to Smith, who was scalded by boiling water and is now recovering. Lauren was outraged by Kat's antics and decided to take revenge on the girl for her nephew. A childhood friend convinced the manager that it was an accident and that the maid had no malicious intent. The prince declared that he would not allow anyone to change or take away his workers, sending the baroness to deal with the numerous guests of the palace. Upset that she had not succeeded in removing Henry and Catherine at once, the woman proudly left the room. As Lauren walked down the long corridors, she began to think of a plan for revenge. There was a knock at the door of Duke Jones's guest quarters. His daughter stood at the door and asked permission to enter. Even at home, her mother, the second daughter of Duke Aidan Gordon, insisted on marriage with the first claimant to the throne, Duke William. The girl wanted to talk to her father alone. Lily's parents had a marriage of convenience at the insistence of the Marquise's formidable father, so the child grew up alone. The Duke did not have any special feelings for her and now felt guilty. The girl asked to visit the estate of Prince Edward, with whom she had been in love since childhood. The young lady understood that her mother did not support her feelings. Jones promised his daughter to fulfill her wish. The Duke was tired of always following his wife's orders. In his youth, the nobleman fell in love with an actress, and they had a girl. During her husband's absence, the Marchioness threw the woman and child out of the house. Soon the Duke learned that Catherine had died. Her mother could not bear the grief and also died. The maids were sure that Jones's jealous wife had killed the girl. The nobleman was very saddened by the loss of his loved ones. Lily was almost the same age as Kat. The age difference was only a couple of months. Finally, the Duke decided to break the contract and live freely. The main character was settling into her new place and was happy with her small personal room. Edward appeared unexpectedly. He decided to check how his maid was settling in. The prince did not like the lack of a window and the cramped conditions. The girl, on the contrary, was very pleased. She liked everything. Kat hoped that the formidable servant had not had time to complain to her master. The master and the maid were discussing the upcoming dinner. The maid was surprised that the prince agreed to go alone. The main character went to the workers' canteen. The girl was happy with her free time and happily walked along the alleys of the palace. Suddenly, someone's voice called out to Catherine. The stranger greeted the maid and agreed to accompany her to the kitchen. The girl was dressed like a noble person, but behaved simply. Her name was Sophia. Together with her escort, Kat walked further along the palace courtyard. Suddenly, a lady in a black dress and a veil covering her face approached her companions and slapped Sophia on the cheeks several times. Catherine rushed to help the poor man, at which time the attacker disappeared. The knights guarding the palace approached. The main character told them what happened and showed them in which direction the woman ran. Sophia sat with her hands pressed to her face. Suddenly, the noble girl stood up, introduced herself to the guards as the Duchess, and accused Catherine of beating her. The maid did not understand what had happened to her companion, why she was lying. The knights had no choice but to take into custody the commoner who had raised her hand against the noblewoman. The main character was shocked, not understanding what her fault was. Shortly before the incident, Baroness Lauren found Sophia and offered her a position as Prince Edward's personal servant. But to do so, she had to imprison his ugly maid. The lady came up with a cunning plan, which the young lady carried out. Accompanied by guards, Catherine went to the dungeon. At this time, the prince, unsuspecting, was having dinner with friends. The invited guests that evening were the Duke of Jones and his daughter. The dishes were very tasty. Lily thanked the owner for the warm welcome. Dennis and Harris made small talk. The young noblewoman expressed a desire to meet more often and invited Edward to her estate. Blushing, the lady touched the prince with her hand as a sign of friendship. The pretender to the throne jumped up. He did not like it when someone dared to touch him without permission. Harris realized that a scandal was inevitable and urgently invited his friend into the next office for a confidential conversation. Edward said goodbye to the guests and invited them to continue their meal. In the prince's office, the friends were able to discuss the results of the meeting in a calm atmosphere. Dennis was generally pleased with the behavior of his senior comrade. Warm relations with the Jones family were the key to their alliance and support in the struggle for the throne. Harris suggested switching to business. Edward decided to open jewelry stores following the maid's recommendations. The friends understood that it would take a lot of time to construct buildings and recruit and train people. During the conversation, an excited Henry ran in. The senior assistant informed the gentleman that his maid was under arrest for attacking a socialite. The prince grabbed his sword and was about to free the maid. Dennis blocked the path of the angry Edward. It was impossible to do rash actions. My friend almost lost his head for his words. Having calmed down a little, the prince handed the weapon to Henry. It was necessary to clarify the details of the incident. Harris had to find out everything about the injured aristocrat. Edward was going to question all the witnesses. Dennis was ordered to find his father, Duke Benjamin, who could testify on Catherine's behalf. The assistant could not believe that his master would worry so much about the maid. The prince understood that it was necessary to change the status of the servant so that no one could offend her anymore. It was deep night outside. The moon was shining brightly. A man in a dark cloak with a hood on his head secretly walked towards the prison. Harris caught up with his friend and offered to take him a shortcut. He knew almost all the palace secret passages. The young duke asked Edward to make his choice and begin the fight for the throne. Otherwise, other members of his family and friends might suffer. Previously, the prince had repeatedly refused the title of heir, but now he realized that his rival was very cruel and cunning and would not spare his opponents. The main character had already spent several hours in the dungeon. Kat was ready to cry, remembering the fluffy puppy Mani and his promise of a happy life, while only misfortunes rained down on the poor girl. Edward appeared unexpectedly. He promised to sort everything out and free the maid in the near future. Catherine was glad to see her master. The prince was very upset by what happened. The maid told what really happened, and she was not guilty of anything. Harris watched the meeting and the relationship between the master and the worker closely. Another gathering of friends took place in the study. News quickly spread throughout the palace. Lily came to see Edward. The girl was ready to give false testimony in order to free her lover's maid. The prince was interested in the offer, but he wanted to know the price of the deed. It was a backup option if his friend did not show up at the palace in time. The noble lady was ready to support the maid free of charge. When Lily left, her friend appreciated her words and again brought up the topic of a successful marriage with such a reliable partner. Sophia was already ready to confess everything, but the strict Baroness insisted on her own. Lauren was afraid that she would be exposed and reassured the Duchess, promising support. Duke Benjamin's carriage entered the palace. No one checked the box under the seat. into which the noble gentleman, who had managed to leave the palace several days ago and arrived at the call of a friend, climbed with difficulty. The knights let the servant, who often went outside the residence on the orders of his master, pass. No one was visible inside the carriage. The prince summoned all the people involved in the incident to conduct an investigation. Duchess Sophia claimed that out of her kindness, she decided to take the maid to the workers' kitchen. The girl's father insisted on dealing with the maid, who dared to raise her hand against his daughter. Henry, on behalf of Catherine, told what happened that evening. The Duke was surprised by the appearance of an unknown lady in black in the courtyard of the palace, which is carefully guarded. Edward asked the noblewoman to explain the discrepancy between her words and the maid's, and she began to get confused in her testimony. Harris said his friend was fair and ruthless about lying, regardless of status. The young duke's words puzzled those present. The prince promised to deal mercilessly with anyone found guilty. The young lady looked into Edward's eyes and trembled with fear. The pretender to the throne understood that this would not be the only attempt to harm him and his servant. His assistants could be next. The situation once again confirmed that it is necessary to accept the status of head of state in order to protect loved ones and relatives. The Duke said there was a witness who was willing to testify as to what really happened. The Baroness could not imagine that anyone could have seen the scene of the attack on Sophia, and she watched the front door with bated breath. Everyone was interested in who could prove the maid's innocence. Duke Benjamin entered the meeting room and greeted everyone present. The prince's old friend and assistant arrived just in time. Just recently, Dennis disguised himself as a servant and drove a carriage in order to get to the investigation in time. The father had to hide under the seat so that no one could notice the arrival of the gentleman. The carriage passed the palace gates without delay. No one could notice the Duke, who had left the palace a few days ago. The nobleman said that he was not far from the scene of the incident and saw a stranger in black hit Sophia in the face. Benjamin did not have time to go down and intervene in the detention of the maid, who was not guilty of anything. Lily and her father were also present in the hall during the investigation. The head of the family was shocked by his daughter's actions. The senior servant stood aside, fearing exposure. The prince waited for Sophia's confession with a smile. Lauren mentally begged the girl to come up with something to save the situation. For the young lady, the surest solution seemed to be to pretend and faint. Edward was upset and ordered the Duke's family to be locked in the palace, and no contact was allowed until the girl recovered, so that he could then decide on the final punishment. The meeting was over, and as the prince passed Jones, he stopped. The pretender to the throne asked if the father knew about the proposal his daughter had come to him with. Edward left, leaving Lily and her father standing there in confusion. Sophia lay on the bed, pleased that she had been able to temporarily avoid punishment by citing memory loss. Lauren calmly walked past the guards. She understood that the girl would never become her assistant, and was the only one who knew the whole truth. A drop of poison was supposed to finally remove the threat hanging over the Baroness. Sophia felt only a slight prick, and did not have time to understand anything. The girl's gaze became clouded. She completely stopped feeling. Catherine threw off all her masquerade and happily went to wash off the dirt in warm water. Immediately after being released from prison, the main character went to the bathroom, deciding to use her master's apartment during his absence. After quickly washing herself, the girl began to clean up the remaining water. Edward had not slept for several days. He did not dream of becoming emperor. The prince was satisfied with a quiet life in a small duchy with his own activities and business. But he had to protect himself and his loved ones, so there was no other way out. His rival was cruel and would quickly deal with his enemies, having taken the throne. With a headache, the prince went to his room to rest. Edward decided to relax in the fragrant water, but saw the steam and was surprised. Someone was already in the bathroom. The main character heard approaching footsteps. She did not expect the owner to return soon and urgently looked for glasses. The girl closed her green eyes and ran to get dressed. Kat was glad she had put on her wig ahead of time. The prince was glad that the maid was freed and did not notice anything. He was ready to change her situation immediately to protect her from humiliation and insults. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and Harris ran in. A friend saved the situation by telling her that Sophia was paralyzed. The Duke managed to see the couple and apologized for the unexpected intrusion. The young noblewoman was currently being examined by a doctor. The prince quickly changed his clothes and got ready to visit the sick woman. The main character sighed with relief. She almost succumbed to the master's passion. In the palace corridors, Edward met the emperor's cousin, his confidant. Duke Franklin had just arrived and greeted the prince. The young man referred to his busy schedule and promised to talk at another time. Left alone, the servant reported to his master that the maid he was looking for had been released from prison. The young assistant was happy to help his master. Franklin was pleased with the news. He had long thought of a plan and hoped that everything would work out. It was for this purpose that the aristocrat had been watching the girl for some time. The unjustified punishment of the maid could help him. A few months ago, the Duke approached his longtime girlfriend with an unusual request. The theater owner urgently needed to find a girl with golden hair and green eyes. Emma was very surprised by the influential gentleman's request. Franklin revealed the secret. He had a daughter, Amanda. She was sick since childhood and almost never got out of bed. Now the girl is 17 years old, and if she cannot appear at a social event, then after her father's death, their possessions will be given to distant relatives. It was necessary to find a temporary replacement for the girl in order to secure her status on the day of her coming of age, and for this purpose, the help of the theater owner was needed. Frankness for frankness. Emma also shared the secret that the Duke of Jones had an illegitimate daughter. Both duchies were distantly related on the maternal side. The illegitimate girl inherited golden hair and green eyes, and she was in the hands of the theater owner all this time. After visiting Sophia, the upset prince returned to his office, realizing that someone had gotten ahead of him and was removing the witness. He needed to protect Catherine. The friends refused to accept the decision of their senior comrade. Faithful Henry was ordered to prepare separate apartments for the prince's future chosen one. When they met, the old servant told the maid about the plans of the master, who decided to make her his concubine. Catherine was shocked. She had no intention of going to bed with the prince. The assistant was surprised by the maid's refusal. Realizing that she couldn't change the master's decision, the main character decided to run away while he was away for a few days, as Henry said. Having collected the bare necessities, Catherine was walking towards the gate when a carriage caught up with her. Inside was Duke Franklin with his servant. The aristocrat kindly agreed to give the maid a lift. The nobleman did not waste time and told the girl about his plans. The main character was shocked by the offer to replace the Duke's sick daughter during the performance on her 18th birthday at the palace, so that she could fully use her title in the future. Franklin promised to pay a sum that would be enough not only to pay off the theater owner, but also to open his own clothing store. The parties signed an agreement in which Catherine receives money after her release and does not claim any further status. The main character was happy. She was supposed to be free in just a few months. The hunting grounds were noisy. Once a year, noble people gathered here to have fun. The carcass of a wild animal was prepared in advance for the guests' arrival. Edward decided that the main events were completed, and it was time to return to the palace. The prince was unhappy that it had not yet been possible to identify the main instigator of the maid's arrest. Dennis assumed it was the head servant's idea. Harris arranged for further surveillance of Lauren and her entourage. Edward declared that he was ready to begin a rivalry with Duke William. The prince was determined to become emperor. The friends swore to always and in everything help and support their master. Suddenly, a knight ran into the hunting lodge. Edward was informed that his maid had gone missing. The pretender to the throne was very upset by the news. Dennis's joy knew no bounds, although he tried his best to hide his smile. Late in the evening, a girl knocked on the door of the Marquise Olivia. The lady was waiting for the guest and quickly let the stranger in. The aristocrat introduced herself as Franklin's younger sister and looked closely at the beauty. Catherine learned that she would be living in this house for the next 2 months and gaining the necessary skills and knowledge. The Marquise immediately pointed out that the servant had no right to claim the title of noblewoman in the future. Olivia's attitude towards her upset cat. The girl explained that she had her own plans, and she was not going to break them. The contract was signed. She needed money, not status. The main character revealed the secret of how the little orphan managed to survive all these years. The Marquise was satisfied with the words of the prince's former maid. Edward searched unsuccessfully for traces of the missing maid. The knight at the gate claimed that she had not left the palace. The guard had a list of all the people who had entered the city in the last 3 days. The prince was interested in the carriage of Duke Franklin, in which he was with a servant and a girl with golden hair sticking out of a large hood. Harris was tasked with collecting information on all the girls in the palace with similar characteristics. Edward invited the Marquis for a cup of tea. The pretender to the throne asked the guest about the stranger who was in his carriage. Franklin said he simply offered to give a lift to the city to a maid who looked somewhat like his daughter. According to the aristocrat, the coachman dropped the girl off at her request on one of the streets. The answer was banal, but something in the old nobleman's gaze confused the prince. The friends gathered together to summarize the information, agreeing that a simple girl would not be able to buy herself an expensive wig with luxurious golden hair, which meant that these were real curls. Edward knew that the maid might run away after learning of his plans. The young man began to miss the girl's thick glasses and voice. Olivia warned Catherine that she would have to wear a wig again, as the knights were looking for a stranger with her rare hair colors. Indignantly, the main character gestured with her hands, which irritated the true aristocrat. The Marchioness hoped that she would be able to teach the girl social manners for the sake of her niece's future. Amanda begged her aunt to help her so that she would not be left without her possessions. Olivia herself was in a similar situation when her husband suddenly died and his relatives deprived her of all her property and threw her out on the street. Her brother took in his younger sister, who devoted herself to caring for her sick niece. The search for the girl with long golden hair continued on the streets, so the Marquise went to her old friend Emma for advice. The idea of finding the corpse of a poor girl and transforming the body for money interested Olivia. It was necessary to find out in more detail what the maid looked like and prepare her things. The Marchioness called Catherine to her room. The woman questioned the girl with displeasure in order to take into account all the details. Olivia had already managed to take a maid's uniform from the main character's suitcase. Catherine was outraged that the aristocrat touched her things without permission. There were no jewels, but there was something personal, including drawings of new clothing designs. The menacing voice made the girl shudder and remember that she was in a completely different world, where a person could easily be killed. The Marquise continued to question the girl's features and learned that the prince had not seen her eyes or figure, but had been informed that her body was hidden by a corset and a large layer of clothing, and that her hair was dark blonde. The main character apologized for her outburst of anger. It was necessary to continue classes. There was little time left. Catherine remembered the large lenses of her glasses, behind which her eyes were not visible. Olivia began searching for a suitable body, which could be found in the poor neighborhoods on the outskirts of the city, where ordinary people were dying of hunger and disease. A few days later, the prince received news that the body of a girl in an oversized maid's outfit had been found in the river. Edward personally went out to see the maid. The poor girl looked very similar, but the young man wanted to touch the girl. Dennis was very surprised. He was ready to immediately identify the maid. Despite Henry's resistance, the prince took the drowned woman by the hand. Edward made sure that she was not his maid, but ordered that this information be hidden. Only now did the prince begin to remember that he had met the girl much earlier. It had been at the opera house several months ago. The heir to the throne ordered that the body be buried in accordance with existing traditions, as his servant. The shape of the hand and the length of the legs were completely different, which allowed the aristocrat to judge the forgery. Considering that even the death was faked, the prince was going to play along with the strangers, so he pretended to recognize the maid, fearing for Catherine's safety. The friends were instructed to find out everything about the servant's past and the Duke Franklin's family. Edward was still confused by the Marquis and his sick daughter, about whom there was practically no information. It was time to leave for the duchy where Amanda lived. The knight checked all the people leaving the capital. The girl in the carriage was accompanied by a noble lady and did not match the required description. The Marchioness ordered Kat not to appear on the street so as not to attract any unnecessary attention. Duke Franklin's estate was large. A huge palace awaited new guests. Upon arrival, Olivia asked the assistant about her niece's condition. The main character was in a huge, beautiful house for the first time in 12 years. She had already completely forgotten her father's estate. The Marquise ordered the girl to change her clothes and go to meet Amanda, and she herself immediately went to her ward. Catherine changed her outfit. The maid helped her tidy up her hair. The girl was very interested in the question of her double, her character and habits. The maid did not want to answer for a long time, but in the end, she whispered to him to behave carefully and try to make friends with the lady. Catherine entered the young mistress's bedroom. The girls looked at each other carefully. Olivia was surprised by the resemblance between the beauties. Amanda looked closely at her guest, envying her health and strength. Morning came, and another gentleman was received in the palace. Prince Austen's cousin was delighted to be back after a long trip. The Marquis was supposed to arrive with William, who was disliked and even feared by many. The first claimant to the throne was a representative of the ancient family of the Dukes of Gordon. Some of his relatives were married to noble persons and supported him, despite his insidious character and cruelty. Many years ago, a shaman predicted that the next emperor would be the one who married the first lady of the kingdom. Austen assumed that William was already in the palace and courting Lily. The main heir believed in the sorcerer's words. Edward remembered his childhood years. The portal was being repaired once again, and he, his mother, and the maid had to set off on a long journey in a carriage. The boy looked with interest at the nature outside the window. The maid tried to entertain the baby on the long journey. Suddenly, the sounds of gunfire and screams were heard ahead, and the young empress suspected a conspiracy. Through the window, one could see the bodies of the slain knights who had ridden ahead as guards. The maid tried to calm the little boy. Mom hugged her son and asked him to follow all her instructions. She told Edward to behave very quietly, no matter what happened, and to definitely stay alive at any cost. The little prince did not understand anything, but he made a promise. The carriage stopped. The empress and her maid sat humbly inside. An unknown person in a mask asked where the child was. The head of state's wife explained that the boy had become ill and that he had returned to the palace with the second maid. The empress asked who dared to kill her guards and detain the carriage, realizing that these were not simple robbers. The attackers confirmed the aristocrat's guess, saying that she would die from the sword of her husband's rival from the Gordon clan. The killer carefully examined the entire cart. Both girls sat motionless. The first to die was the maid, who fell right into the arms of her mistress, happily ready to accompany her even in the next world. The second blow of the sword hit the empress in the chest. A few hours later, the knights found a broken carriage and several corpses around it. The emperor tried everywhere to find his little son. The young lady was lying on top of her maid, right inside the carriage, with a lot of blood around. The guard began to take out the girls' bodies. The prince slept curled up under the lush dresses. His mother hid him there, knowing that the child would die first, which is why the lady did not move and did not get out of the carriage. Edward woke up from a nightmare, each time remembering the terrible events. Then he was very afraid that he would never be found. The emperor's heir had refused the title several times, but now he was ready to enter the fight against the family's long-standing enemies. There have been changes in the Franklin Duchy. Amanda, along with the old servants, quickly left the main mansion. Workers from neighboring estates who served the master, but had not previously encountered his daughter, were called in for Catherine. Early in the morning, the main character went out onto the balcony, enjoying the warm sun and the opportunity to live beautifully in a noble house. Olivia once again scolded the girl for her thoughtless act. Her sick daughter could not allow herself to behave like that. Catherine's build was a little different, so the Marchioness ordered a servant to find a new designer. It was necessary to prepare several outfits for going out in high society. As Edward had predicted, his rival, after returning to the palace, decided to visit Duke Jones in the near future. The first heir's assistant, Marquis Liam, reported to his friend that the old Duke Franklin had recently visited the prince. The purpose of the visit remained a secret because due to his daughter's illness, the aristocrat withdrew from political games. Although the latest information indicated that the young beauty was recovering. Amanda could have become the first lady of the state if not for her condition. William jokingly suggested eliminating the problem in advance. Liam agreed with his friend's opinion. The Duke knew that there were currently 2 girls who were seeking high status, the first of whom was Franklin's daughter. The young man remembered the old shaman's prediction. The magician was tortured several times, awaiting new prophecies. The wizard stood firm and was unwavering. He added that his heir would become the new head of state. Duke William Gordon was surprised by the elder's latest prophecy. The shaman could not see the future, but he heard voices welcoming the new ruler. One day, the old man changed his fate and saved the empress. After this, the sorcerer lost his gift and disappeared for a long time. Duke Jones received a very distinguished guest. William greeted the aristocrat and asked to be left alone with Lily. The girl absolutely did not want to see the first contender for the throne, who was supported by her mother. They were very distant relatives. Jones was forced to comply with the Duke's request. Left alone, William asked how the lady's meeting with the prince had gone. He knew that the girl was secretly in love with Edward. The future emperor had no intention of hiding his intentions and proposed to the young noblewoman to marry him, since she was now the first lady of the state. Lily upset her interlocutor by informing him that Amanda was on the mend and would be present at the palace for the performance in honor of her coming of age. William did not believe the Duchess. The doctor reported to him about the illness of Franklin's heiress. If the information was reliable, then Lily gave up her place to a rival and advised the uninvited guest to change the object of his courtship. The girl didn't know exactly what was happening to Amanda. The Duke's daughter accidentally overheard her father's conversation with Franklin, who shared the good news. William did not give in, offering the young lady to leave Edward and go over to his side. Lily was instructed to learn more about the old Duke's family and the state of her rival. The pretender to the throne demanded that the girl tell Amanda what a wonderful man and a true knight he was. Lily didn't want to lie to anyone at all. In case of refusal, William promised to deal with Prince Edward. The poor Duchess begged on her knees not to touch her lover, agreeing to any action. The first contender for the throne was pleased with the meeting. He had an involuntary ally. He was ready for the fight, looking forward to the upcoming presentation of the young ladies. It remained a mystery who would be able to win these battles, and how many more surprises awaited everyone ahead. Life often presents surprises when you least expect them. The main character realized this truth when her TV suddenly broke. The fluffy puppy Mani, who appeared on the empty screen, promised a happy life if the girl called his name and chose the picture she liked. The little pet suggested several options. Christine stopped her gaze on the happy family scene. She herself grew up without parents. The choice was made. The bonus was unearthly beauty, which had no competitors. Waking up in the body of a 5-year-old girl, Catherine, who was kicked out of the mansion of Duke Joan's father along with her mother by his jealous wife, who could not stand her husband's mistress and his illegitimate daughter, the main character found herself in the back room of the opera house. After burying her mother, the girl lived and worked in a costume shop since childhood. Her dream was to open her own designer clothing store. At the age of 17, the beauty learned that the mistress of the stage had received a ransom for her from a rich duke. Kate agreed with Emma to return the money within a few years, since the amount was fabulous. At the theater, the main character first met Prince Edward, the second claimant to the imperial throne. In order to earn money, Catherine decided to get a job as a maid in one of the estates of a noble aristocrat. In order not to draw attention to her beauty, Catherine disguised herself and looked like an awkward, fat, ugly woman with large glasses. Because of the lenses, it was impossible to see her green eyes. Having unexpectedly received a promotion and ending up as a maid in the prince's bedroom, the main character was shocked. The girl's determination and intelligence helped her gain trust and become Edward's personal maid. Catherine often accompanied her master. In a jewelry store, in order to increase income, the employee suggested changing the decor, putting up glass display cases with goods and training the staff, instead of hiding precious stones. A visit to the imperial palace changed the fate of the main character. The prince was almost everywhere with his faithful childhood friends and assistants, the Marquises Dennis and Harris. Kat was given a separate room. The happiness did not last long. The enemy appeared almost immediately in the person of the formidable and envious senior servant Lauren. The evil baroness was going to take over the positions of assistants to the emperor's heir and prepared a plan to get rid of the ugly servant that Edward was protecting. The young aristocrat Sophia was supposed to help her in carrying out her insidious plans. The noblewoman told the knights that an unknown maid had suddenly attacked and beaten her. The main character was taken to prison to await punishment. The maid's master was upset and called Duchess Sophia and her father to investigate, with Harris, Lauren, and Duke Jones present in the hall with his daughter Lily, who had been in love with the prince since childhood. Realizing that she would be severely punished for lying, the aristocrat pretended to lose consciousness and fainted. The cruel baroness got rid of the witness by pricking her with a needle laced with poison, after which the unfortunate woman became paralyzed. One evening, at the insistence of his friends, the prince organized a dinner to which the Duke of Jones and his daughter were invited. His assistants insisted on Edward's marriage to a noblewoman in order to strengthen their position in the struggle for the throne. However, for some unknown reason, the young man was attracted to the fat maid, and in order to protect her from further threats, despite the resistance of his assistants, he was ready to make her his concubine. The old manager Henry informed Catherine of the owner's decision. The main character refused and ran away from the palace. Duke Franklin had been watching the girl for a long time. She was very similar to her sick daughter Amanda, who was soon turning 18, so it was necessary to take part in a ceremonial performance at the palace in order to retain her title and estates in the future. The aristocrat signed a contract for a large sum of money, according to which the beauty would play the role of his child for several months, and after a successful appearance in society, she would cease to claim the place of a noblewoman. His sister Olivia had to teach the commoner manners. The prince searched for traces of the maid for a long time. The corpse of the stranger, dressed in her clothes, forced Edward to pretend that he had calmed down in order to continue the investigation secretly. The old shaman predicted that the place of the emperor would be taken by the heir to the throne who married the first lady of the state. The main contender for power, the cunning and cruel Duke William, intimidated the young noblewoman Lily and ordered her to persuade Amanda to marry him. Otherwise, he would kill her and Edward and marry Jones's daughter. Emma had been the owner of a theater for many years and knew many secrets of the nobles of the entire state. People said that the owner herself bought the establishment immediately after the death of her husband, the old Marquis, and was a very powerful woman by nature. One little girl managed to melt the ice in Emma's heart. On the orders of the Marchioness, the theater owner hid the 5-year-old daughter of her husband and former actress Haley, who quickly died, having lost her child. Kat grew up as a kind and cheerful beauty. A few years later, Emma went to the entertainment district in search of a girl who looked like her, determined to change the game of life. Having found a suitable candidate, The woman bought the sick poor thing with golden hair and green eyes. The theater owner took another girl with her. Grace, as the lucky companion was called, was ready to serve the savior who had pulled her out of the house of sins and illnesses. The grateful girl had to constantly report to the lady about everything that happened to Kat in Amanda's estate. Catherine was a diligent student and spent her days trying to remember the names of nobles and persons of imperial blood. The girl was most interested in cities and countries. There was little time left before her appearance in society, so every day was precious. But Amanda constantly demanded that her aunt visit her at the remote estate, where she temporarily hid with a group of faithful servants. Olivia tried to explain to her niece that she had little free time. The girl was very jealous of her relative, who had become her educator since childhood, towards the healthy and smiling Kat. The young Duchess was fond of various types of tea and herbs, having inherited knowledge from her father, so the woman constantly drank a drink prepared from a special collection. The main character doubted the necessity of drinking tea constantly. Olivia often had headaches, and the decoction helped her cope with this ailment. Catherine suggested that her mentor take up gymnastics and spend more time outdoors. The neck muscle massage was unusual for the Marquise, but she immediately felt relief. The girl convinced the aristocrat, and they began to hold classes in the blooming garden. During one of her visits, Amanda again reproached her aunt, who had begun to visit her rarely. The cruel noblewoman asked her father to get rid of Catherine. The unsuspecting protagonist was learning dance moves. The new maid Grace was amazed at the girl's energy, which made her study too. The friends often spent time together. They read, wrote, and danced. One day, the maid received a small gift. It was a handmade bracelet made by Catherine. It was time to go to the capital. The road was long. The travelers stopped for the night at a familiar inn. Olivia was upset that she didn't have time to order outfits for the girl. The idea came into the head of the beauty. She could be the designer of her own clothes. The Marquise learned that her brother had left the palace, leaving her with the burden of introducing the girl. The prince was informed that his maid had previously lived in the opera house, and he decided to go there to try to find out information about Catherine. True friends were ready to travel together. As he passed by, Harris noticed the beauty. A girl with golden hair sat in a carriage. The prince also saw the stranger. He knew that the daughter of Duke Franklin was to come to the palace for a social event, so he hoped to meet her there. The appearance of the Marchioness Olivia confirmed Edward's assumption. The beauty looked out the window and suddenly saw the prince. The look in the green eyes immediately became very frightened. Edward could not understand the stranger's unexpected reaction. His friends reassured him by saying that she had never left her estate before. There was a performance going on at the theater, after which Emma went down to the utility room. The theater owner found the golden-haired girl on the floor, not breathing. Having covered the body, the owner called her old friend. Duke Jones's wife had been to the spectacle and was about to go home when she heard the news. The husband's illegitimate daughter, who had lived in the theater since childhood at her request, was lying lifeless on the floor of one of the utility rooms. The maid confirmed that the deceased had green eyes. The Marquise could not believe what had happened, but Emma denied her involvement in what had happened. She herself had only just entered the room. The aristocrat ordered the woman to secretly bury the unfortunate girl. No one was supposed to know about the incident. Officially, the girl was buried 12 years ago. Duke Jones knew that little Kat had died at the age of 5, and then his beloved had passed away, so there was no one to grieve. The journey was over. Catherine stood again in front of the central entrance of the imperial palace, but now in the status of a noble aristocrat. The main character was confident in herself. She would soon be free. Marquise Olivia was very worried. She was afraid that the deception would be revealed. The servant who met him confirmed the fears. Duke Franklin had left the palace the day before and gone to his estate. It was surprising because the father had to be present at his daughter's performance. The main character and her companion settled into the assigned apartments. There was an urgent need to find a designer for the young lady's outfits. Catherine suggested that Olivia go to the theater to get advice from its owner. The beauty stood again in front of the main entrance to the building, where she had spent more than a decade. Emma was surprised to meet old acquaintances. The lady confirmed that the girl herself could be a fashion designer, as she had seen her drawings more than once. The pictures showed a lot of outfits to choose from. This was a favorite theme of Christine, who dreamed of her own studio with a store. Emma promised to let the tailors go so that they could have time to sew the dresses, and Catherine's imagination immediately drew a picture of her own workshop. The main character's longtime friends will be able to work with her. Olivia liked the idea. The beauty suggested making the young Duchess Amanda the owner of the studio, and she would perform the work of an unknown designer. It was necessary to find a place for the equipment and a place to work. The Marchioness could not allow Catherine to go out into the city in the role of a noblewoman so as not to attract attention. The main character used her old method of masquerade and wore a wig with a maid's uniform. Olivia remembered her last visit to Amanda. The niece accused her aunt, who had looked after her since she was a child, of betrayal. She did not want to see her on the estate anymore. The Marquise was left without a husband many years ago. She was thrown out on the street by distant relatives, which is why the woman agreed to help her older brother so that a similar situation would not happen again with the sick girl after the death of her father. The main character was the complete opposite of Amanda. The girl tried to help everyone, never cried, and steadfastly endured difficulties. The noble lady was surprised that Catherine had thought through every aspect of opening a studio and clothing store down to the smallest detail. The girl found an empty mansion far from the city center. Kat's assistants were surprised by her optimism. They did not understand why the premises had to be on the outskirts. The beauty explained that it was more convenient for visitors to make their choice without attracting the attention of the crowd. The girl planned to prepare a sign, order a glass display case, and display mannequins. The small mansion standing nearby could have served as a home for female workers. The older friends couldn't believe that they would live in luxurious conditions. The main character showed her first sketches. The notebook contained not only outfits, but belts, hats, and other accessories. Catherine hugged her allies. It was time to return to the palace. The happy beauty said goodbye and went about her business. The prince was driving along the main street when he saw his maid through the window for a few moments. He got out of the carriage, but was late. The maid quickly disappeared among the passers-by. The theater was not far away, so Edward did not rule out the possibility that Catherine might go there. The other day, Emma received a letter from the actress Taylor, who had left for a neighboring city, who warned her mistress that a prince had come to her in search of a servant and asked her to help the girl. Edward didn't keep us waiting long. Now the young man knew exactly where and under what circumstances he first met Catherine. The owner of the theater welcomed the distinguished guest. The prince tried to find out from the woman whether her ward had appeared recently. Emma said she hadn't seen Kat since she got the job, and promised to let her know if she stopped by. Returning to the estate, Edward ordered surveillance of the theater. He did not trust his mistress. Harris couldn't believe that Catherine had once lived at the opera. The second heir to the throne was satisfied with the trip. The carriage with the Duke Franklin's coat of arms began to appear frequently on the city streets. Passers-by noticed that the carriage usually stopped at a beautiful mansion. The corset, according to the main character's pattern, was ready. All that was left was to sew dresses for the first appearance and other various events. Catherine understood that she needed a lot of money to be independent from the aristocrats. The girl's dream was gradually beginning to come true. The sign was ready. This was the first step in opening a clothing store. A few days later, a package containing a strange object was received. The main character was very happy with the mannequin. The friends couldn't understand what this thing was for, which their little girl admired so much. Kat showed how to conveniently display an outfit on a human body model. The women were surprised. They had never seen anything like it. The beauty planned to order several mannequins so that she could display them in the shop window. Time passed quickly. The day of the social presentation of young ladies who had reached adulthood arrived. The palace was waiting for guests. Olivia was pleased. The dress was ready on time. The main character looked great, although her outfit was very different from the accepted standards. The maids looked at the beauty with delight. Even her hairstyle was special. The Marquise was very worried, concerned about her brother's absence. Catherine whispered to her mentor that everything would be fine. The girl stood in the room before the exit to the main staircase and realized that she was also nervous. The main character pulled herself together, dreaming that she would soon be free. The prince was resting alone. He was not going to go to the hall. The main character heard a menacing shout, a female voice calling Lily. Catherine saw a lady walking sadly down the palace corridor, with tears in her eyes. The girl was very upset. She again quarreled with her mother, who was trying to match her with the first contender for the throne. The beauty cautiously peered around the corner to see who was making the noise. Kat remembered seeing a stranger at the theater with Duke Jones. It was her half-sister. Edward asked his friends to bring Franklin's daughter to the lounge after the first dance. Harris was excited, even though several years had passed since his first official appearance in society. The ceremony began. The red carpet awaited the young aristocrats. The first to be invited was the Duke of Jones's family, and the Marchioness also arrived for her daughter's ball. Olivia and her niece Amanda were invited second. Those present were struck by the girl's beauty and her appearance. Everyone was especially surprised by the aristocrat's unusual outfit. The nobles were chatting among themselves, discussing the design of the dress and hairstyles. The Duke was amazed to see his cousin, who reminded him of the daughter he had lost in childhood. Jones and his family came over to greet their relatives. The nobleman was glad to see the girl, about whom he knew nothing, considering her ill. It was the first time Lily had seen her father differently. He had never spoken to her in such a voice. The nobleman asked Amanda's permission to have the first dance. The Duke's own daughter loudly begged her father to pay attention to her, but he was deaf to her request. Catherine couldn't understand what was going on in her father's family. She always thought that he left her and her mother for the sake of his wife and child. The music started playing cheerfully, and it was time to dance. The couple was magnificent. The guests present thought that the daughter was dancing with her father. Only the main character knew that this was actually the case. The Marquise and Lily stood aside. The mood was spoiled. The girl remembered the order of the first pretender to the throne. The aristocrat approached Amanda after the dance to introduce her to her friends. The young noblewomen were delighted to meet her and vied with each other to ask the girl about the fashion designer who had created the luxurious outfit. Catherine told where the unknown studio was located and promised that her new acquaintances would be pleased. Gorgeous, handsome Harris appeared a few minutes later. The Marquis had time to pay many compliments to the ladies present before he reached Franklin's daughter. Suddenly, the young man felt dizzy, and he sank right down at the beauty's feet. Catherine decided to accompany the poor man to the restroom. The girl quietly asked what really happened. The handsome man opened his eye. He was surprised by the guest's resourcefulness. In a separate room, on a sofa, the prince awaited a meeting with the first lady of the state. Catherine, in the guise of Amanda, bowed to greet the imperial heir. Without waiting for permission to raise her head, the girl cheated, pretending that she was not completely recovered and felt ill. Friends began to vie with each other to reproach the prince for his cruelty. Edward smiled mysteriously. He had figured out the beauty's move. Those present looked in surprise at the satisfied face of the pretender to the throne. The prince appreciated the wit, beauty, and courage of the aristocrat and proposed to become his wife. The girl stood silently for several minutes. Edward continued speaking, thinking that the beauty was petrified with happiness. The emperor's son did not hide the fact that he was in love with another woman, who would certainly become his concubine. The main character's calm refusal sounded like a gunshot. The girl was not going to marry anyone. She had her own plans. The prince was shocked by the answer. Harris and Dennis couldn't believe their ears. Catherine looked at Edward angrily, remembering his words about concubine. The young man had seen a similar look before. The heir to the head of state tried to find out the reason for the refusal, suspecting the involvement of his rival. The main character denied knowing William, expressing a desire to return to her quiet estate, citing health reasons. When Franklin's daughter left, the prince ordered that she be watched, even though he believed her words. Edward was thoughtful. The girl's character reminded him of his maid. The expression and facial features were the same. Only the figure and height were slightly different from the maid. The next day, Catherine visited the studio again. The friends were waiting for the story. They were very concerned about how the social reception went. The main character reported that several people were interested in her outfit, so there will be a lot of work soon. Since the girl will not be able to appear in public in the future, tailors will have to take orders themselves and serve wealthy clients. The women were surprised by the words that capricious individuals could be denied work, citing their busy schedule. Catherine was very keen to ensure that the customer was satisfied. While the main character was making plans, a little boy was closely watching her movements. Olivia's head started to hurt again due to nervous tension. The Marchioness received news that her niece was very upset by the great success of her double at a social performance and fainted, remaining in an extremely serious condition for several days. The woman remembered that even her older brother initially refused to help her when she was left on the street after the death of her husband, who left no heir. Amanda inherited her father's character and was also cruel. Olivia understood that Catherine was in danger of dying, and it was necessary to save the girl who had managed to melt her heart. Harris passed on messages to his friend from people following the beauty. The young man noted that Amanda often visited a studio almost on the outskirts of the city. The most important thing was that the clothing store had a glass display case, and the girl personally displayed the outfits on strange devices. The Marquis personally went to verify the information. Edward agreed that there could be no coincidence. The heir remembered sketches of clothes on paper in the maid's personal belongings, which he once accidentally saw. Harris convinced his friend to visit the store together. The prince began to compare Amanda and Catherine, coming to the conclusion that they were very similar in many ways. The Marquise decided to personally visit her brother at the estate to find out his plans. Franklin was very cold and ordered not to visit his daughter. He promised to pay his sister money and send her to a distant, abandoned estate. Olivia was surprised that she was forbidden from further staying at her brother's estate. Catherine's maid helped her upset mistress pack her thing. The Marchioness asked Grace to inform her if there was any plot against her and her friend on the estate. The prince did not wait and set off to check his guesses. He began to analyze the facts, realizing that Amanda was the owner of the studio and Kat could be her designer, or they were the same person. the look of the glass display case turned out to be luxurious. The main character had a new idea. Now she sewed a doll on which it was possible to display not only clothes, but also other accessories. The baby was a sample of the product for buyers. Customers could immediately see a cap or hat, as well as other fashionable items that could not be shown on a mannequin. After finishing her work, Kat stretched contentedly. She really enjoyed the preparations for the opening of the store. The ringing of the bell announced the arrival of guests. One of the assistants met the guests, getting ready to show them her goods. The beauty didn't have time to leave. The prince immediately noticed the supposed owner of the store. The girl had no choice but to personally greet the nobles and inform them that she had come to buy another outfit. Amanda, represented by Catherine, bowed in respect. The prince took the girl's hand firmly. Edward did not want to let the beauty go for a long time, making her worry. Finally, the hand was freed, but the young man managed to notice the hard skin and calluses on the fingers. The prince assumed that the aristocrat sewed herself, which could greatly harm her reputation if others found out about it. But she referred to country work far from the city. Edward settled comfortably on the customer's sofa and began asking Amanda about the display cases, which were exactly the kind that one of his acquaintances, with whom the noblewoman was possibly dating, had suggested he make. The main character denied anyone's help, citing that she accidentally heard an interesting offer from passers-by at the market. The emperor's heir was finally convinced that it was his servant in front of him. Surprised that he had not noticed the resemblance before, he was glad that Harris had stopped by the studio out of curiosity. Otherwise, the search would have gone down the wrong path. The prince did not show it, knowing the character of the girl, who would immediately disappear as soon as she realized that she had been exposed, and proposed a joint business. Catherine was surprised by the possibility of selling clothes and jewelry together, although it was a promising option. Edward asked for help in opening his jewelry store and promised to listen to advice. The main character knew the persistence of the interlocutor. It was easier to agree, but she asked in return to allocate investments for the promotion of the studio, since the Duke stopped allocating money. The girl suggested conducting partnership affairs in writing in order to reduce the amount of personal communication, saying that she was going to return to the village in a month and planned to marry a common man without titles in the future. Edward grinned after listening to the beauty's speech to the end. The pretender to the throne stood up. He was ready to accept all conditions. The prince complimented Franklin's daughter on her appearance, saying that she looked healthy, and whispered that they were now in a secret relationship. The owner of the theater was in her room in a small mansion, which many years ago was an establishment like a brothel, and later bought and converted into a cozy home. She received news from her maid from the estate of Amanda. Olivia unexpectedly visited Emma to ask for help. The Marquise noticed that the atmosphere of the room was very different from the appearance of a powerful and self-confident woman. There were many children's things here that the owner had not put away since a long time ago. The mistress of the opera reported that Catherine lived here for some time, including after the death of her mother. Then she moved to the theater's costume department. Amanda's aunt received information that her brother was planning to kill the prince's former maid, who debuted in the palace instead of her daughter. The woman was ready to stop communicating with her relatives in order to help the girl who fulfilled her contract. Upon learning that Catherine's entry into high society had been magnificent, Amanda harbored anger and asked her father to get rid of all traces of the commoner. Apparently, the illness had left its mark on the psyche of the young noblewoman. Olivia noticed that the taste of the tea was softer and more pleasant. It was very different from what she regularly drinks, according to her niece's recipe. In one of the letters from the Duke of Franklin's estate, Grace told about the composition of the drink that she once helped the young mistress prepare for the Marchioness. To the regular tea leaves, a herb was added for stomach cramps, temporarily causing a severe headache that goes away after a while. This is the distinctive feature of this type of medicinal leaves. Thus, for many years, Amanda tried to make her aunt dependent on her, supposedly saving her from the disease because the symptoms gradually passed, which meant that the tea helped. Olivia was shocked by the information. She had suffered for so many years in vain. Emma sympathized with an old friend who had been bullied for years by her little niece. The theater owner reassured the Marquise. It was necessary to figure out how to change the situation in the duchy. It was not for nothing that people considered the mistress of the opera to be a powerful and decisive person. She always tried to find a way out. A plan had already begun to appear in her head. It was necessary to think everything through and prepare. And at this point, the ladies parted for a while. During his next visit to the studio, the prince noticed a cute doll, which he immediately took for himself, realizing that it was made by the hands of his chosen one. Edward left. The main character was able to breathe a sigh of relief. not realizing that she had long been exposed by her former master. The friends were charmed by the distinguished guest. He was handsome, smart, and polite. But their young lady did not understand his merits. Dreaming of a simple man who would take care of her, the friends returned to the palace. The doll was next to its new owner. Harris looked in surprise at the toy in the hands of his older comrade and begged him to get rid of it in order to avoid rumors and gossip. He did not understand why Edward so suddenly stopped asking about the maid, who could be in Amanda's estate, and interrupted her search. The Emperor's heir smiled at the slow-witted Marquis and ordered the carriage to turn towards the theater. Emma changed into a modest outfit and changed her hairstyle to get ready for the meeting. The prince arrived on time and was very surprised by the new look of the young woman. The owner of the theater respectfully greeted the guest. The pretender to the throne immediately moved on to questions. He had already guessed everything and was waiting for Emma's explanation, who began the story with a visit to Franklin in search of a double for her sick daughter. Catherine was the most suitable candidate, given her age, green eyes, and golden hair. The prince reminded that posing as an aristocrat is punishable by death. The hostess of the stage asked for mercy from the nobleman. She could not refuse the duke. Harris stood there, not believing what was happening, wondering why Emma didn't look for another girl, to which he received the answer that Catherine was Jones's illegitimate daughter and Amanda's relative. Edward couldn't believe it. He knew the girl had died in infancy. Emma said that by order of the Marquise, the child was hidden, informing everyone of her death. But in fact, she lived in the theater all the time, hiding from people and constantly disguising herself. The girl grew up, but did not change at all. She had a sympathetic character. The owner of the theater was going to tell Jones everything, hoping that he would be able to provide her with a happy life after a successful debut at the palace, regardless of his wife's wishes. The prince was interested in the question of why the smart woman changed her mind about her decision and told him all the information. Emma did not take into account Amanda's character, who, out of anger and jealousy, is ready to harm Catherine. The little girl was very kind since childhood. She deserved a better life. Edward realized that his former servant was in great danger. Emma already knew that the prince was going to make her a concubine and asked him to marry her. The young man was very dear to the beauty. He completely agreed. Even her current status could not influence his decision when he came to power. But the prince warned that many involved in these events would die, so now Emma has no other choice. The theater owner suggested a plan. First, they had to meet secretly to discuss all the issues with Olivia and Jones. The place was chosen to be the studio when everyone had gone home. Knowing the character of his future chosen one, the prince asked to keep all information a secret from Catherine. When it got dark, the main character was already finishing a new outfit. It was time to return to Olivia's mansion. The society girls gathered around Lily's dessert table to gossip. The young duchess heard that her lover had already visited the new studio, where the beautiful Amanda's outfit was sewn several times, probably in order to give her a gift. Both contenders for the throne were not present at the presentation. As for William, he was not interested in banality, so he was not carried away by simply beautiful girls. An original, extraordinary option was needed, so Franklin's daughter was unlikely to be interesting to him only for her beauty. One of Baroness Tiffany's friends shared information that the first heir behaved modestly in the palace, but let loose on the island given to him by his grandfather, Duke William Gordon, where he drank alcohol and had fun with women of easy virtue. The main character didn't even have time to come to the studio in the morning when the prince appeared right behind her, irritating her with his frequent visits. This time, he came under the pretext of taking measurements from his assistants. The hall was small, and it was necessary to organize a waiting area. A friend suggested using the neighboring villa, which they had recently moved into, as it was empty during the day. Having agreed, the girl left her dear guest to get to work. Edward was very afraid that Catherine would disappear immediately as soon as he told her about the wedding. The Emperor's heir really liked the cheerful smile of his beloved, which radiated warmth. He was no longer going to lose her and wanted her to always be by his side. The unexpected order from the owner surprised old Henry. He had to prepare for several days the famous estate where Edward had fun with the girls. The plan was invented to please the gossips and mislead the main rival. Jones's daughter plucked up her courage and asked Amanda, that is, Catherine, to invite her to visit. It was necessary to carry out the order of the hated William. Lily was very worried, afraid that the beauty would refuse. But the girls set a day for a meeting at the estate. Because they were considered relatives, the maid led the aristocrat into the hall. The young lady was surprised by her hostess's new outfit. The girls chatted over a cup of tea, telling each other various news. Seeing that the guest really liked the clothes, Amanda advised her to visit the studio. Lily tried to talk about Prince William, praising his virtues, but her interlocutor was not familiar with him and did not express interest, talking about the beautiful countryside. The girls were sisters, but their characters and living conditions were completely different. Catherine, in the role of Amanda, was not interested in the social events that her guests tried to invite her to. She easily referred to her health condition. Lily understood that the plan had failed. She had failed to fulfill William's urgent request and involve the girl in social life. The daughter of Duke Jones even tried to intimidate her sister that she would not be able to adapt to society in the future. But she knew that money and power change any views and relationships. The first meeting took place. The girls said goodbye and promised to visit each other more often. All this time, Lily envied her decisive and active conversationalist. But she, on the contrary, had been afraid of everything all her life, unlike her relative, from whom light and radiance seemed to emanate from within. Emma informed Olivia in advance about the place and time of the meeting. It got dark. The outskirts were empty. No one paid attention to the few people hurrying home from different parts of the city. The Duke read the sign and wondered why his sick niece needed to be taken care of in the studio, and was informed that he would find out news about his daughter Kate there. The theater owner met everyone at the entrance and advised them not to talk loudly. Edward was already inside and waiting for the conspirators. Jones greeted the Emperor's heir with surprise. The Duke could not understand. He received news from Emma and did not expect to see the prince here. Only now did the pretender to the throne notice the similarity in eye color between father and daughter. Jones learned the fate of his illegitimate child from the moment of her stay in the theater. Then, as a maid at Edward's until turning into Amanda, he was upset and did not want such a hard fate for his beloved girl at all. Looking at everyone present, the Duke realized that something was about to happen. The Marquis said that after the successful debut, Franklin's daughter became angry and ordered her father to destroy the beauty. Jones didn't believe the words. He could lose the girl again. The prince explained to the Duke, who did not understand anything, that he was in love with Catherine and wanted to be her husband. Thus, when Edward ascends the throne, his wife will become Empress. His Highness has already sent his assistant to Amanda's estate to prepare for the meeting of the detachment of knights. The prince personally intended to offer the cruel Duke to recognize Catherine as his legitimate daughter and register Amanda as an adopted child, which would allow her to keep the inheritance. Marchioness Olivia must become the manager of the estate. For the sake of his daughter's happiness, Jones was willing to agree to the plan. The prince considered this revenge for the attitude towards Catherine. In case of refusal, he was ready to destroy his opponents. To sign the agreement with all participants of the secret meeting, the servant brought a special pocket watch made by magicians. As soon as a drop of blood fell into the hole of the dial, the oath of allegiance was valid for the rest of life. If someone broke or divulged the secret to outsiders, the blood vessels in the brain would burst and death would occur. Jones also had to sign the contract in blood. Since his wife was the Marchioness of the Gordon family, he had long wanted to take revenge on her by marrying his own daughter to Edward, but fate decreed otherwise. A few days after Amanda's visit, Lily decided to change her style and visit a tailor shop that had attracted a lot of attention lately. At the assistant's cozy villa, Catherine discussed the business development plan and upcoming expenses with her partners. The girl wanted to organize a fashion show with a small buffet to advertise the studio. The main character enthusiastically explained that guests would be able to discuss the outfits shown and order them immediately. Edward, without hesitation, approved of his partner's idea. He said that he had already purchased land and was planning to build several stores. The girl was ready to show the jewelry along with the outfits as an advertisement. She did not understand the prince's words about what was the most important treasure for him. The heir laughed and explained that he had made the right decision in making the beauty his partner. Time flew by while they talked, and the prince got ready to go to the palace, leaving Harris to continue the topic of the jewelry business. Lily was near the studio when she saw her beloved's carriage. Running closer in the hope of meeting, Jones's daughter saw Edward coming out of a neighboring house, accompanied by Amanda. The girl joyfully rushed towards the prince. However, the pretender to the throne only glanced at the young aristocrat. Edward turned away and walked past as if he did not recognize the Duchess. On the island, at William's residence, another week of festivities continued. The main heir could not count how many bottles were drunk during these days. Marquis Liam arrived from the palace in the morning and was horrified to see his older friend in a deplorable state. He could barely speak or move. The appearance of several friends was significantly worse. William felt like his head was splitting into pieces. The assistant tried to remind her that the Duke had instructed Lily to conduct conversations with Amanda, but the information she had received indicated that the girl had failed, and that Edward, after visiting his famous estate, had met with Franklin's daughter, who had made a successful debut at the palace. Liam advised the prince to return to the palace to put pressure and question the aristocrat. William knew that the younger heir had not previously claimed the throne, and wondered why he had suddenly changed his mind. The first suitor knew the girl's weak character. It is difficult for her to persuade anyone, so the second prince does not pay attention to her, despite her feelings for him. Edward forever remembered the event of 12 years ago and hated the Gordon family, to which his older rival and Lily's mother belonged. The next news that Amanda had opened a studio in the city disappointed the prince. William didn't like women in business. The contender for the state's main title was satisfied with docile girls like Jones's daughter, who were easy to control. The friends concluded that it would be easier to kill Amanda in order to make Lily the most influential unmarried lady. Returning from a long trip, Dennis could not believe that Amanda and Catherine were one and the same. The young man was even more shocked by the thought that the beauty should become empress. His friends confirmed Edward's decision. Harris reminded that the girl currently has the status of First Lady and not the illegitimate child of the Duke. The friends planned to visit the studio together the next day to discuss business issues, which finally finished off Dennis. Catherine was pleased with the arrival of the aristocrats, and she had new proposals that needed to be discussed. The Marquis reintroduced his friend and assistant to the prince, who simply could not believe that the luxurious lady was the same former ugly maid. The hostess invited the guests to sit down at the table to start work. The appearance of the establishment shocked Dennis. It was comfortable and beautiful here. Now he fully approved of the prince's idea. Catherine suggested moving the jewelry store to a location near the theater. Seeing beautiful artists on stage, aristocrats will want to look better and will go shopping. Dennis confirmed that the building on the street currently houses a men's club, which would be better relocated further away from the center. After the performance, it will be convenient to buy a piece of jewelry to give to your beloved woman or an artist you like. The appearance of the jewelry will attract the attention of everyone who passes by the glass display case. Emma recalled recent events when she decided to take care of her ward in advance, picking up a sick girl in the entertainment city who looked like her. Franklin's servant gave the theater owner a poisonous substance that was supposed to work quickly and painlessly. Before taking the poison, Agatha thanked her savior for pulling her out of the dirty place and allowing her to watch the opera. The poor girl wished that a girl like her would be happy for both of them. Having asked the higher powers to be born in the next life into a rich family where everyone would love her, Agatha drank the contents of the bottle. However, nothing happened. The drug clearly did not work. Emma and the butler watched the girl closely. It was some time before the poor fellow fell unconscious, and the servant went away to report what had happened to the Duke of Jones's wife. Emma felt sorry for the girl, but she had to hide from the jealous Marchioness that the real Catherine was alive. After a few minutes, Agatha coughed and opened her eyes, apologizing and asking for more poison. The theater owner was not prepared for such an outcome, but she did not want the unfortunate woman to die, so she decided that fate had decreed that she survive. The woman did not imagine how the unplanned situation could influence all future events, but she decided to save the girl. Emma asked to follow all her instructions. Agatha had to hold her breath for a long time so that the Marquise, who came to look at the corpse, would not suspect anything. Then what had to happen happened. The aristocrat who appeared was not at all upset about the unexpected death of the girl, whom everyone believed had died in childhood, and ordered her to be buried so that no one would know. The cruel noblewoman left, leaving Emma alone with her motionless body. The theater owner could not keep the poor girl, but promised to find a doctor and take care of her until she could move on a prosthesis after the amputation of her sore leg, and then her entire subsequent life depended only on Agatha. Passing by the empty bottle, Emma wondered why the unknown remedy didn't work. Several months passed. The poor girl survived the operation thanks to her savior, who helped her and then provided her with money, clothes, and got her a job as a maid. But soon the girl was fired. She had not eaten for 2 days, not knowing where and how to live further. Staggering from hunger, Agatha did not notice the carriage flying out to meet her. In the carriage sat Lily, sad after meeting the prince near the studio, and the young baroness. They were returning from a social party. Tiffany once again tried to cheer up her friend, knowing her indecisive nature and all the secrets about both contenders for the throne. The coachman noticed the man too late and lost control. The horses almost ran into the girl, who immediately fell. Lily asked the servant to bring the poor man to her. The driver of the carriage approached the victim and saw that she could not get up. Green Eyes looked with fear at the man who helped her up and led her to the carriage. Jones's daughter had to offer to take the girl to the doctor. As curious people began to gather around, she sat the commoner next to her, The girl with golden hair and green eyes looked like Amanda. The prosthetic right leg sticking out from under her long dress explained the reason why the victim had difficulty walking. Tiffany knew about William's instructions to befriend Franklin's daughter, and that Lily had failed to fulfill it, and a plan had formed in her head. The Duchess was very upset that she could not carry out the assignment in order to have the opportunity to be with Edward. The Baroness suggested presenting the lame poor fellow as a gift to the first prince. Then he would be happy and forgive Lily. Catherine was sorting through the chest of drawers in her room and found one document. It was a deal that turned her quiet life upside down. Then the owner of the theater received a ransom for the main character from a rich nobleman. The girl was going to work for several years to get her money back and become free. A feature of Catherine's character was that she tried to overcome difficulties and look for a solution. The Duke came to visit Emma. She showed him the room where his beloved woman lived with her child. He was very grateful for their shelter. At first, the theater owner wanted to find some benefit because she could blackmail the Marquise. Then, circumstances changed. The girl grew up. She was determined, and in some ways reminded the owner of the opera of herself. She did not give up and fought against injustice, did not resign herself to her fate and problems, but fought against them. Jones could not believe that his cat could become empress. It was believed that Edward himself was the son of the emperor's concubine. Emma knew a lot, having spent her life in various establishments before buying the theater. She knew how to keep secrets. More than 20 years ago, Empress Delia's sister became His Majesty's second concubine. 3 years before this, the head of state's wife had a miscarriage, which meant that the son of the first concubine, Prince William, was the only heir. But both women became pregnant. The empress gave birth to a stillborn child, and the concubine's baby was born a month prematurely. The imperial family was grieving. After some time, the condition of the second concubine deteriorated sharply, and Delia was engaged in raising the boy. This helped her to cope with the loss more easily. This was information that was announced to the entire state. In fact, Edward was the empress's son, whom she was saving from the treacherous Gordon family. It was a big secret that almost no one knew. This is why the position of crown prince has remained officially vacant until now. The emperor could not forgive his opponents for the attempt on his wife's life, and did not want to appoint a man who had their blood as crown prince, considering that he had a legitimate heir. Until a certain point, Edward had no intention of claiming the throne. He had his own estate and business, which suited him completely. The Duke was interested in what could change His Highness's decision. Emma said that Catherine almost died, so the heir decided to protect his loved ones, but he needs to pray so that he can persuade the stubborn girl to marry him. The second contender for the throne appeared in the studio again, inviting the beauty to have breakfast together. While the partners were drinking tea with delicious sandwiches, something rustled in the paper package that the guest brought. Edward's servant offered to remove the noisy object. Before Catherine could react, a white lump of fur pounced on her with a joyful bark. It was a small puppy with big ears. One evening, a tired Christine was returning from school. Suddenly, a fluffy baby ran up to her and grabbed her leg with its paws. The girl stopped. None of the owners were visible nearby. The animal seemed to her as lonely as she was. The main character felt sorry for the little dog. As a sign of gratitude, the dog licked the hand. Christine was upset that she couldn't take the pet with her. She studied and worked a lot. But there was still not enough money for an apartment and food. The girl decided to wait for the owner, together with the shaggy lump. It was cold outside, so the main character wrapped the baby in her scarf. It gradually got dark. The lights were on in the windows. The girl began to feel sad, remembering her dead parents who left her alone in the big city. Christine dreamed out loud that she would like to be reborn in a huge mansion in a rich, loving family, so that everyone would live happily ever after, and there would always be someone nearby who would take care of her. The puppy listened attentively to the lonely girl, then jumped out of the warm house and ran into the depths of the street. The main character hoped that the baby sensed his owners and rushed towards them. The white dog ran away, and Christine did not hear how he promised to make her dreams come true. A few days later, the girl saw a similar pet on the screen of her broken TV. Now the same baby was sitting in the beauty's arms. The prince said that he was returning from his estate in the morning when he saw a lonely puppy on the road and took it into his carriage. The owner of the studio asked why Edward had started visiting the country residence again. The emperor's heir had to maintain rumors about new girls in order to secretly visit the studio. The fluffy lump settled comfortably on the girl's lap and fell asleep. The prince had not yet decided what to do with the puppy. Catherine asked to leave the little pet with her. Edward was upset. Now he would rarely have to visit the baby, as he had to spend more time in the palace so that William would not suspect anything after his unexpected return from the island of entertainment. Kat was also upset. She didn't know the first contender, but she had heard only bad news about him. The prince asked his partner what name she would give the puppy. The main character thought about it. For some reason, she really wanted to name her pet Mani, which meant a lot, remembering all the friends who helped her. Catherine asked the baby if he wanted to stay at the villa with her, and if he liked his new name. The shaggy lump looked into the eyes of its owner and cheerfully wagged its tail. Edward listened to the girl, understanding how much she had to endure in her years for her to communicate so kindly, even with the dog. The prince was ready to do everything to make his chosen one happy. A joyful smile never left the main character's face. The heir to the throne also lost his mother early on and often felt lonely. Unlike the poor girl, the aristocrat had a high title, thanks to which he did not need anything. The prince said goodbye, and it was time to return to the palace, ordering Catherine not to go anywhere and to go out less often, fearing the tricks of the eldest heir. The Duke of Jones's daughter sent her sister an invitation to tea. The letter stated that William was very keen to meet Amanda. After some consultation, Olivia and her ward decided to cite health reasons and cancel the trip. The main character saw how the Marquise's attitude towards her changed. The formidable mentor took care of the girl as if she were her closest person. It was time to prepare for the opening of the studio. Putting her wig back on to avoid attention, Catherine went to her favorite job. Before leaving, the prince carefully assessed his partner's disguise. They managed to hide her golden hair, but the girl was given away by her unique eye color. Edward remembered the thick lenses his maid wore and promised to order colored glasses from the magicians. A pleasant event was the news that the actress Taylor, on the advice of the main character, agreed to Harris's offer to work as a manager of a jewelry store. Catherine remembered the kindness of the girl, who was often interested in her successes. They talked a lot and discussed the future. It was then that the artist said that in old age she wanted to work in a store with jewelry, which she always loved to look at. The main character was happy. She knew that she could trust her older friend and distant relative of her mother. Edward saw a little dress on the table and was surprised. Catherine said that this was their puppy's new outfit, and the prince had never seen anything like it before. Mani slept peacefully on a soft pillow, sewn especially for him. The owner of the studio asked whether the pets of the nobles had collars. The girl was absolutely delighted to learn that this direction could bring in additional large income. The main character immediately took a pencil and began to make various sketches. Edward liked the beauty's enthusiasm and interest. In the evening, Lily received an invitation to come to William's mansion. The Duchess was surprised by the late hour. She had previously reported that Amanda had cited health reasons and refused to come. The aristocrat was walking through the dark corridors when she heard strange sounds ahead. Entering the large hall, the girl saw William with a whip. Agatha was kneeling before her tormentor. Lily called out to the prince. She did not want to witness his cruel amusements at all. William didn't like the wine and poured it over the poor victim's head. The aristocrat was very upset when she brought the girl from the street as a gift. She involuntarily wanted to take revenge for her appearance, reminiscent of her happy relative with golden hair. The young noblewoman could not stand it and ran out of the hall, leaving the mansion. Lily had a picture in her mind of her father dancing with Amanda at a social event, both of them looking happy. Agatha lost consciousness. She was no longer of interest to the tormentor. The sun was shining brightly in the morning. The weather was wonderful. Having disguised herself, Catherine, accompanied by her maid Olivia, went out for a walk through the streets of the city. Suddenly, an exhausted girl appeared from one of the barns and crawled out into the street, begging for help. The main character thought about the old woman, but was shocked to see a very young poor thing. Agatha couldn't get up. Her whole body was covered in bruises and wounds. Catherine quickly sent a maid for the carriage. The beauty took off her jacket and covered the stranger's tortured body. Sitting on a soft sofa, Agatha thanked her saviors, promising to work after her recovery. The main character thought that she would try to find a place for the girl in the studio. Agatha couldn't believe her luck. The poor fellow was placed in a separate room in the villa. Kat's senior assistants washed and changed the guest. The main character advised her new acquaintance to rest and gain strength, promising to call a doctor. Tears flowed from Agatha's eyes. She had never seen so much kindness and care before. The owner of the studio took off her wig and said that she sometimes has to disguise herself. The girl was surprised and swore not to tell anyone the secret of her savior. After the wounds were treated, the poor fellow fell asleep. The next day, the doctor examined the patient and promised to make the most modern prosthesis. The doctor was interested in the unusual hair color. In his practice, he had already encountered such an effect after the action of poison. Then the person died after some time. Agatha showed no signs of poisoning. To cheer up her new friend, Kat brought a pet. The girl was interested in the baby's house with a soft bed. The main character promised to teach the guest to sew after her recovery. A few days later, William again invited the runaway Lily to his mansion. The first contender was very upset that the girl did not cope with the task. The young aristocrat tried to explain that it was not so easy to persuade her sick sister to participate in social events. On the master's orders, the guards seized the frightened noblewoman. Lily found herself locked in a dark room with no windows. The last days were passing before the grand opening of the clothing store. The main character once again checked the list of things she had planned earlier. Invitations were sent out. Food was purchased. Before the opening, the owner of the theater came to congratulate her former student. Emma noticed that the owner and her pet were wearing identical outfits. The woman was happy for the girl, who was able to achieve great results herself, and wished her further success. Harris gave his partner her order, which the prince promised to fulfill. The Marquis opened the small suitcase with curiosity. In the suitcase, there was a collar with precious jewelry for Manhwa. Edward's friend wished him luck. He was looking forward to the opening of the jewelry store, informing him that his older friend was delayed and would arrive the next day. Harris noted with pleasure the girl's saddened look. That same night, horsemen rode up to Franklin's estate. The knights guarding the gates were surprised by the late visit. The prince introduced himself and ordered that he and his companions be allowed through, as they were searching for rebels hiding in these parts. The servant managed to report to the master about the arrival of uninvited guests. The master hoped for a better outcome and ordered a detachment of knights to be assembled. Franklin greeted His Highness as he entered the office. The prince revealed the purpose of his unexpected visit. The Duke tried to resist, but he didn't stand a chance. Edward had calculated all the options in advance. The knights brought the daughter of the owner of the estate into the office. Franklin was forced to admit defeat. The Duke had to keep Catherine as his legitimate daughter. Amanda was to become an adopted, illegitimate child who could receive and keep the entire inheritance. The prince took as his wife a noble girl, who was later to become empress. Franklin pretended to agree, although his daughter categorically refused the new status. The Duke hoped that he could rectify the situation and bided his time. The prince said that there would be no help. He had prepared for the meeting in advance and really wanted the cruel aristocrat to refuse, so that he could take revenge for their insidious plans towards Catherine without remorse. Having later met with Emma's faithful assistant, who regularly sent information about Franklin and Amanda's plans, the prince thanked the girl for her help. Grace knew she was doing everything for her friend. Edward promised to take the maid to the palace so that he and Catherine could be together. The opening day arrived. A small stage was prepared in the studio, and tables were set with light snacks. The prince managed to arrive on time after a difficult night, the events of which no one was supposed to know about. The invited guests enthusiastically discussed what they saw. The owner of the establishment appeared, and under the approving glances of those present, Edward offered his hand to the girl. The couple looked great. Catherine appeared in a new dress that emphasized her figure. She thanked everyone and suggested starting a small performance. Guests in soft, comfortable chairs watched as the theater's actresses in various outfits took to the stage. The pets also wore clothes that matched their owners in color and shape. There were several options, from a festive banquet to everyday wear. After the performance, those present enthusiastically discussed what they had seen. Orders poured in from all sides. Many wanted their animals to also look fashionable and beautiful. After the event, a tired Catherine looked at her works again. The prince congratulated the beauty on her successful start. The girl's green eyes sparkled with joy. She was very worried before the opening that she would not be able to interest the guests. Edward reminded that the next event is planned for the next few days, in which the main character should also take part. Catherine jokingly announced that she wanted to move to the country estate for health reasons. The emperor's heir looked at the mischievous beauty. The prince threatened to visit his partner every day. The partners said goodbye. It was time to go on vacation. Suddenly, the main character felt unwell. The girl was completely out of air. She couldn't breathe. Catherine managed to ask Edward to call one of the assistants. Before she could finish speaking, the beauty fell unconscious. The prince did not know how to help the poor man. His Highness tried to loosen his tight clothing. The fabric was strong, so Edward pulled out his blade. The young man cut the corset that tightly squeezed the beauty's body. The main character felt relieved and woke up, indignant about the ruined dress. The prince looked closely at the girl who was very close to him. A stranger in the theater appeared before my eyes. Then his maid, whom Edward saw in her nightgown. Now the owner of the studio and his business partner sat in front of the heir. Edward picked up the beauty and sat her on the sofa, covering her with his cloak. The prince told Catherine about a birthmark on her chest that several girls he had met recently had. The main character realized that her secret was revealed. The beauty said that Amanda's father offered her a lot of money, and she was forced to agree because she did not want to be the concubine of a prince who would not ask the consent of his servant, who saw his dates with numerous mistresses. Edward thought, Now he knew the whole truth from Catherine's lips. The emperor's heir carefully straightened the beauty's hair. The young man silently got up from the sofa and went to the window. There was complete silence for several minutes. Then the pretender to the throne looked at the girl and promised to prove his feelings to her. The main character was left alone, pondering the prince's strange words. Kat sat on the sofa in her studio for a long time. The situation was resolved. Now it was possible to calmly leave for Franklin's estate and finish the rest of the business. Only the girl's soul was empty and restless. A day later, the opening of the jewelry store took place, and numerous glass display cases were filled with jewelry. The main character also came to see the success of her partners. As a token of gratitude for her help, the prince offered the girl to choose any product. Catherine was very happy. Her inner voice advised her to choose the most expensive piece of jewelry. The girl approached the display case with earrings. The selection was huge. The beauty couldn't decide. She liked everything. Edward watched his partner, their hands almost touching each other. The emperor's heir himself suggested earrings with emeralds. The prince chose this decoration because it matched the color of the main character's eyes very well. To take her mind off things and get some fresh air, Catherine went outside. Near the store, aristocrats discussed purchases and guests. One of them noticed that Lily was not at the opening, despite her feelings for His Highness. The main character listened to the conversation. The noblewoman shared information with her interlocutor that Jones's daughter had been seen in William's mansion in recent days. The noblewomen decided that their friend had decided to change her chosen one and was having fun with the first contender for the throne in the hope of marrying him. Catherine was surprised by the news. She already knew a little about her half-sister's character. The girl could not do such a thing. The main character's thoughts were interrupted by the prince, who was worried about her long absence. The beauty looked thoughtfully at her business partner. Edward jokingly suggested that the corset was again preventing its owner from breathing, causing her to smile. Catherine asked the prince how long it had been since he had seen Lily. Edward thought. Recently, he had been busy with his friends preparing for the opening of the store, so he had not met the aristocrat for several days. The heir denied his relationship with the duke's daughter, thinking that the owner of the studio was jealous of him. The main character didn't even think of approaching the prince for anything. She already knew his character. Catherine asked if William had arrived in town and where his mansion was. The girl never saw the first contender for the throne. Rumors spoke of the cruelty and dissolute lifestyle of the eldest heir. Catherine began to fear the worst. The main character suggested that William could have captured the quiet Lily and abused her, knowing about her feelings for Edward. The modest aristocrat could not resist anyone, much less the insidious prince. The owner of the studio hoped that her terrible fears would not come true. Edward saw that the girl was puzzled by something and offered his help. Catherine promised to contact her if necessary. However, a plan was already maturing in the beauty's thoughts. Despite the differences, the girl was Kat's sister. Edward thanked his partner again for her help. It was time to part. The exhausted noblewoman spent her last days alone in a dark room, cursing herself for responding to William's invitation. Today, an unknown giant entered the room and extended his hand to her. The man grabbed the aristocrat. The owner allowed him to have fun with her, but not to kill her. Lily resisted desperately, loudly calling for help and threatening to kill her. Intimidation had no effect on the giant. He held the fragile noblewoman tightly, wondering what he could do with her. Jones's daughter knew it was the worst day of her life and quietly begged for help. The stranger touched the girl's soft, silky locks. In a stronger voice, Lily ordered the commoner to remove his dirty hands from her hair. The man got angry and reached into his pants pocket. The blade of the knife flashed in his hands. The stranger confidently approached the frightened aristocrat. A few seconds later, the cut strands of hair flew to the floor. Lily couldn't believe what had happened. Once, as a child, she was in the palace and walking in the garden. The little girl jumped happily, not looking at her feet. Suddenly, the child tripped and fell on the park path. Lily saw someone's legs in front of her eyes. The little girl raised her head and saw an unfamiliar young man who carefully handed her a handkerchief. It was Prince Edward, with whom she immediately fell in love, despite her young age. The Empress stood next to him, admiring the shine of the girl's beautiful chestnut hair. Since then, the girl considered her curls to be her main asset and was proud of them. That was until Jones's daughter saw her happy father dancing with a golden-haired beauty. In a rage, Lily sank her teeth into the offender's hand. The man pushed the noblewoman away and swung, the blade of the knife flashing in the beam of light. The attacker looked back to see who had entered the dark room. The aristocrat looked at the open door with hope, dreaming of salvation. The girl was waiting for her father, hoping that he had come to protect her. It could be the man of her dreams, who has noticed her absence and is worried about her. However, in the doorway stood a scary, skinny maid with huge glasses and a broom. A girl with green eyes, dressed as a servant, demanded that the hostage be released. In the morning, the prince went into the studio to see Catherine again. He had already missed her active character and the sparkle in her eyes. The assistant happily reported that the orders received would be enough for several weeks of work. Edward hoped that the hostess would appear now. Unexpectedly, Mani came running. The girl's friend was surprised by his restless behavior from early morning. The puppy grabbed the prince's cloak tightly, trying to pull him somewhere. At first, everything went smoothly. Catherine, dressed as a maid, easily entered William's mansion. The main character was walking down the corridor when she heard a faint scream. Taking a broom that was standing nearby, the girl opened the door from behind which her sister's voice was heard and saw a frightened Lily. The stranger was also surprised by the appearance of the servant, who ordered him to let the noblewoman go. Catherine threw a broom at the giant, distracting him from his victim. The main character started to run, trying to take the bandit away from the aristocrat. The man ordered the girl not to leave the room, promising that he would return soon and kill both of them. The duke's daughter was completely confident in the threats of the terrible commoner. To the main character's surprise, the attacker ran quickly and managed to grab her by the hair. The wig remained in the hands of the formidable giant. Unable to hold herself back, Catherine fell to the floor, her legs suddenly unable to obey her. The unshaven bandit was pleased, threatening to kill. The stranger was even more pleased with the girl's name. The owner promised him a large sum of money for her corpse, hoping that it was Amanda. The victim asked the man to give his name. The big guy said his name was Bob and swung at the defenseless girl. The tip of the knife was very close. Catherine understood that these were the last moments of her life. The main character remembered the bonus, which promised to help get rid of someone once if she said the magic words. The girl said the magic phrase that Bob was more handsome than her and closed her eyes in fear. When, after a while, Catherine plucked up the courage to look, there was no one around. The brave girl could not believe in the miracle. Kat tried to get up, but her legs still wouldn't obey her. Someone's footsteps and cheerful whistling were heard behind me. The main character looked back in fear. An unfamiliar young man approached the beauty with a confident gait. The owner of the mansion could not understand where Agatha had appeared from again, but a little later he noticed golden hair and green eyes. The girl had never met William before, but she assumed from his appearance that it was him. The prince guessed that in front of him was Amanda herself, whom he had long wanted to meet. The first heir was glad of the unexpected meeting. Now he could realize his plans. The girl behaved confidently, despite the fact that she could not get up and run away. William revealed that he was going to kill Franklin's daughter, who, together with his rival, was preventing him from ascending the throne, while Lily dared to escape from confinement and quietly crept up behind her tormentor. The aristocrat hit the hated villain on the head with a flower pot with all her might. William lost consciousness and fell to the floor. The noblewoman could not understand why the beauty came to look for her. Catherine said she hadn't seen Lily for a few days and was worried. Jones's daughter cried when she heard that they were related and should help each other. The main character saw that the owner of the mansion had woken up, but did not have time to warn her sister about the threat. William stood up and hit the fragile aristocrat in the face with all his might. Lily fell and hit her head on the floor. The first claimant to the throne was very angry. The prince approached Catherine, not holding back his emotions. The main character regretfully managed to think that the bonus was a one-time thing. The girl remembered Edward's kind words with an offer to contact him if necessary. Catherine said goodbye to life again, mentally calling on her loved one for help, and closed her eyes in resignation. The Emperor's heir appeared unexpectedly, accompanied by knights. Edward trapped the villain in magical chains. The prince said William had been arrested for hostage-taking and assault. Lily's father, who had repeatedly come to the mansion but was refused admission, citing his daughter's reluctance to see him, acted as a witness. William couldn't believe he was going to be punished for demanding to be released. Edward approached Catherine. He was very concerned about her condition. The prince said that the main savior was his pet. The puppy brought everyone to help his owner. Manny was nearby and happily waving his ears. His Highness extended his hand to lift the beauty. Jones hugged his own daughter tightly. William did not calm down and insisted on release. The owner of the mansion accused Lily of attempting to kill him. Edward calmly listened to his competitor's indignant cries. The first claimant to the throne defended his inviolability. The prince promised to sort things out and punish those responsible. The main character indignantly defended her sister, who had committed an attack in self-defense. Edward agreed with his partner. It was already late evening when all those present gathered to go home after a hard day. Duke Jones looked with gratitude at Catherine, who noticed Lily's absence and was not afraid to come to her aid. The young aristocrat looked terrible. A huge bruise on her face covered her eye. Edward ordered the guards to take the criminal to prison. William continued to resist, insistently demanding to be released. The prince said that the emperor would personally conduct an investigation. The main character felt better and was able to get back on her feet. Catherine thanked His Highness for his timely appearance at the mansion and rescue. Lily walked up to her sister to say goodbye. The girl confessed that she envied the beauty and therefore wanted to harm her. Jones's daughter thanked her relative for her help. The main character said that she often envies others. There is nothing wrong with that, and has long forgiven her sister, who also saved her. As a sign of friendship, Catherine took the aristocrat by the hand. The girls agreed to meet for a cup of tea. Like the last time Lily visited Amanda, the Duke carefully supported his child. Jones looked at Catherine with love. He was very proud of the girl. The father and daughter went home to the estate. The main character didn't want to part with Edward. Despite the late hour, the beauty suggested taking a stroll along the estate's alleys. Realizing that she could die today, Catherine jumped happily and enjoyed life. Edward jokingly persuaded the girl to behave in accordance with her status as an aristocrat. The girl found an excuse, citing the fact that she was wearing a maid's costume. Catherine asked whether William's status would save him from punishment, to which the prince replied that for him, like his father, the title did not matter. The guilty would be punished. Edward noticed that it did not matter to him who his beloved was, whether she was a noblewoman or a simple maid. The main character listened attentively to the heir to the throne, tears flowing from her eyes. The puppy suddenly appeared and saved the situation by jumping cheerfully into the arms of his surprised owner. The baby looked into her eyes with love. No one could have guessed that this little bundle of joy was a space traveler who always helps good people. It was he who promised to fulfill the dreams of a lonely girl. Catherine thanked her shaggy pet for his help. Following Mani, the girl's friends appeared along with Olivia. The main character apologized to everyone for making them worry. The puppy sat in her arms. He believed that Catherine would definitely become happy and achieve everything she dreamed of, despite new difficulties, people's envy, and the path she would choose, because there were many people nearby who loved her. The beauty will indeed have many obstacles and interesting events ahead of her, which will not be easy to overcome.